Welcome to Nocturne Historia. Outside the palace, the fog lingers like a veil of breath over the sleeping city, soft and unmoving. The gaslights flicker dimly, muffled by dew, while the Thames, murmuring like a restless child, threads through shadows and smoke. Across a great expanse of time, you stand quietly before a high, arched window, your reflection caught in the glass like a ghost. Behind you, velvet drapes sigh with age, and somewhere deeper in the house, a clock ticks a second too slowly. You press a hand to the chilled pane, and through it, see not your own eyes, but hers, wide, watchful, afraid, and enthroned by fate. A girl stares back through the mist of memory. A bell rings again, softer this time. That breathless hush clings to Kensington Palace in the year 1830, when nothing has yet happened, and everything has already begun. Rain spatters faintly against the ivy-covered stones, and inside, in a narrow corridor, candlelight pools in uneven golden shapes across the wooden floor. You hear footsteps, small ones, measured like recitations. The child walks alone again, tiny hands brushing the walls, as if steadying herself against the weight of corridors that do not yield. She is 11. Her name is Alexandrina Victoria, though she rarely hears it spoken with warmth. The servants bow too formally, her tutors nod too sharply, and her mother, the Duchess of Kent, floats in and out of presence like a perfume that lingers but never embraces. Her world is silent observation and corrected posture. Her only comfort comes from pages of stories, genealogies, saints, and sleeping kings whose bones lie beneath England's soil. They sing to her more clearly than her governess ever could. Outside, a robin pecks at the empty marble basin of a fountain. Inside, Victoria sits with a heavy book on her lap, the leather cover cracked and soft with use. She reads of Boudica, of Elizabeth, of queens whose hands held scepters and shaped history. But her own hands are still small, still clumsy with ink. She tightens her fingers around the edge of the page, as if to will herself into legend. The crown is distant still, but its shadow already creeps along her wall at dusk. And when she dreams, the crown is always too large. There is a mirror in her room, oval and tall, edged in brass filigree, and she sometimes stands before it at night, watching the dim shape of herself in nightdress and woolen socks. She wonders if queens ever shiver. She wonders if queens ever cry. Her breath fogs the surface, and she draws a lion into the mist, its mane wild and uncertain, its eyes staring like hers. It's not all silence. Sometimes she speaks to her dog, Dash, a small, loyal creature whose tail never stops wagging in her presence. She whispers secrets to him that no one else hears, that she hates liver, that she wants to ride horses faster than they're allowed, that she dreams of faraway lands and bonfires that never go out. He licks her fingers like he understands. And once, just once, she sees the king. William IV, her uncle, visits with coughs hidden behind handkerchiefs and eyes heavy with years. He places a wrinkled palm atop her head and calls her dear child, though the phrase feels borrowed from someone else's story. When he leaves, Victoria stands very still for a long while, as if the memory might break if she moves. She does not yet know that he will be the last barrier between her and destiny. One evening, as the storm rolls in from the channel and thunder shivers across the sky, the Duchess speaks to her in firm tones. Politics, influence, responsibility. Victoria nods, but doesn't understand. She looks past her mother's voice and into the fireplace, where the embers burn like tiny crowns, pulsing with some ancient memory. She wants to know what it feels like to be good, to be strong, to be something more than watched. The next morning there is fog again, thicker, colder, wrapping the gardens in silence. Victoria wakes early and pads barefoot across her room to the window. Somewhere out there is a world being shaped for her, and somewhere behind her is a world she's trying to outgrow. The lion she drew in the mirror is gone, vanished into the ether. but her face remains. Years from now, she will remember this morning not for what was said or done, but for what was felt. The stillness, the longing, the mirror. That mirror becomes a quiet symbol, returning through her life like an echo. Always, it reflects not the present, but the shadow of what must come. It watches as a child hardens, as a girl dreams, as a woman reigns. It remembers every whispered fear, every lonely hour, every prayer made not aloud, but inward. And as the fog outside lifts just slightly, revealing the garden's first blooming rose, you realize she's still watching you. That night, the candle beside your bed burns low, its flame trembling like a child's lip before tears. Shadows gather along the edges of the ceiling, forming quiet arches that echo the vaulted halls of Kensington. In the hush, you hear the faint click of a door, then the brush of soft slippers against waxed wooden floors. The girl walks again. Alone. Always alone. She passes another closed door. Victoria's world is a museum of silence, framed by rules that tighten with each passing day. Her mother's voice, like porcelain, is lovely but unyielding, spoken in clipped German that turns even affection into instruction. There is no room for spontaneity, no tolerance for surprise. The Kensington system, devised by Sir John Conroy, the Duchess's trusted advisor, governs every breath Victoria takes. She cannot speak without permission, cannot write without review, cannot walk without escort. Even the sunlight must ask permission to enter her world. You follow her into the drawing room, where the chairs are too large and the walls too bare. There are no cousins laughing, no siblings squabbling, only lessons, etiquette, needlepoint, piano, scripture, a tray of weak tea. The governess, Baroness Letzen, watches over her with hawk eyes softened by rare affection. She is a strange solace, strict, devout, but deeply devoted. Victoria clings to her as one might to a familiar constellation in a dark sky. Sometimes she is allowed to play. She gathers her dolls, dresses them, lines them up in silent court. She gives them titles, names, temperaments. She talks to them in hushed tones, inventing intrigues, betrayals, forgiveness. Even in play, she is already ruling, because she knows nothing else. She has never climbed a tree, never run down a hill, never swum in the sea. Yet, she dreams of it, dreams of wind in her hair, of galloping beyond fences, of singing loudly and being heard. The metaphor of the swan returns, a creature gliding with elegance upon still waters while its feet paddle furiously below the surface. Victoria is this swan, composed, compliant, yet struggling unseen. At night, she stands at her window with Dash at her side and sings, softly, in fragments, hymns she only half remembers. It is the only time her voice fills space without reprimand. Her song is not grand, not trained, but it carries something rare, yearning. Ash drifts in the quiet. The adults in her life believe they are shaping a sovereign. They do not see they are suffocating a soul. In the garden, the roses bloom under careful pruning, just as she is taught to bloom beneath discipline. The hedges are clipped with geometric precision, mirroring the rigid structure of her life. And yet, there is one wild rose near the outer wall. It grows slightly askew, not quite permitted, not quite removed. Victoria sees it one morning and kneels beside it, her fingers hovering above its petals as if afraid to bruise its freedom. This rose becomes a silent rebellion. She never tells anyone it exists. She watches it in secret, protects it from gardeners. When she feels the sting of scoldings or the boredom of lessons, she imagines herself as that bloom, alive outside of plan, growing despite constraint. And so the days blur. Reading, prayers, practice, appearances, each movement watched, each word measured. But beneath the surface, something grows. A spark behind her eyes, a question unspoken. What if I am more than they say I am? One night, she dares to ask Letson what it means to be free. The governess frowns, adjusts her spectacles, and gives a careful answer, about duty, about God's will, about sacrifice. But Victoria is not satisfied. She turns to the mirror once more and asks it the same question. This time it gives her no answer, but in the silence, she imagines one. There is an echo in her, a soft music beneath the harp string of her breath. It plays when she stares out the window, when she sees horses in the park, when she glimpses the world just beyond the iron gates. The echo hums. One day, she will walk alone. One day, she will decide. One day, her song will be heard not as disobedience, but as command. That day is still far, but it is no longer impossible. The Duchess continues to tighten the leash, believing her child too fragile to face the storm. But it is precisely in the storm that swans stretch their wings. Victoria knows this, not through lessons or scripture, but through instinct, through dreams that wake her with damp cheeks and a thudding heart. She keeps a journal now, hidden, unread. In it, she writes things she dares not speak. Observations, feelings, questions. Sometimes, just names. Letson, Conroy, Mama. And sometimes, just me. It is in these pages that the girl begins to exist beyond expectation. One evening in winter, frost curls over the glass like white lace. Victoria traces it with a finger, drawing loops and spirals. Dash sleeps at her feet, tail twitching in a dream. She hears a song outside, someone singing in the servants' quarters. A lullaby, low and melancholy. She hums along, softly. It's not the melody that matters. It's the echo of it in her chest. Her voice is not loud, not yet, but it is hers. And in the stillness of that evening, something changes. The girl in the mirror tilts her head, almost curious, almost proud. You notice the difference. The swan no longer glides blindly. It knows it has wings. The silence still hums. It is June 19th, 1837. The air is heavy with the kind of gray that dulls even the brightest brass buttons. You walk through a corridor where every portrait seems to hold its breath. The world beyond the palace walls is still asleep, but something has already shifted. Rain taps softly on the panes, steady and persistent, like time announcing itself with each delicate drop. Beneath the clatter of hooves in the distant mews, a carriage waits, cloaked in black. In the stillness, a girl is being woken. Letson's voice is urgent but tender. Victoria stirs, not with the startled confusion of a child roused too early, but with an uncanny stillness, as though something deep within her already knew. She rises from her narrow bed without complaint, her small feet touching the floor like leaves drifting to a pond's surface. She is 17. No one tells her why at first. But when Lord Conyngham and the Archbishop of Canterbury arrive, wet from their ride, solemn with words not yet spoken, the truth does not wait. William IV is dead. She is queen. The crown, invisible but weighty, passes without ceremony into her soul. No trumpets, no fanfare, only her name spoken with a tremble. Your Majesty. She does not cry. She curtsies. She nods. And something ancient stirs behind her eyes. You almost forget this isn't a memory. She is led into the salon where the Privy Council waits. Nearly 50 men, old, powdered, cold, rise to greet the girl who is now sovereign. Their beards glisten with rain. Their eyes dart with doubt. And still, she enters like a whisper that silences a cathedral. Her voice, when she speaks, is measured, clear, unwavering. I shall do my utmost to fulfill my duty. No one taught her how to say that. It came from somewhere within. From this day forward, she is no longer Victoria the niece, Victoria the ward, Victoria the burden of court whispers. She is Queen Victoria. Yet, In her heart, she feels the fog more than the crown. Later that day, when the rain eases and the servants change the drapes in her new residence at Buckingham Palace, she stands alone at a different window. The streets below are damp and glistening with echoes. A coach splashes through puddles. A child in rags points upward, not knowing what has changed, only sensing that something has. A mother pulls him along. Victoria watches, her fingers clasped behind her back. She does not smile, but she does not flinch. In her diary that evening, she writes with trembling pen, "Since it has pleased Providence to place me in this station, I shall strive to do my duty." The ink dries beside her untouched supper. The room smells faintly of wax, rose oil, and the leather binding of freshly stacked documents. The mirror in the room is unfamiliar, taller, gilded, but when she passes it, she pauses. The girl she sees is no longer merely watched. She is watcher. The mist of girlhood has not fully lifted, but already her reflection carries the shape of legacy. Still, she dreams of Dash, of simpler mornings, of playing with her dolls, now boxed away. She dreams of walking again in the Kensington Gardens, hand in hand with Leitzen, laughing over nothing at all. Those things feel very far now, like stories told by someone else. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. And so begins a new rhythm. Ministers bring papers. Ladies in waiting murmur titles and protocols. The crown itself, though not yet upon her head, rests somewhere close, in the glances of the chamberlain, in the curt bows of foreign envoys. It does not sit easily. It never will. Yet she carries it. In the coming days, she visits Windsor. She tours Parliament. She reads dispatches with more comprehension than anyone expects, and she writes long, detailed entries in her diary, like a dam trying to contain an ocean. Her words are her refuge, her rebellion, her ribbon of self amidst the golden labyrinth of monarchy. The rain continues on and off, as if mourning the end of something it cannot name. The nation is cautious, uncertain, but curious. A young girl now stands where only kings and old men once stood. Some mock, some marvel, but all must watch. The recurring symbol returns, a map. Victoria stares at one often, sprawled across her desk, kingdoms and colonies inked in fine lines and aging parchment. But she does not look at the places. She looks at the blank edges, the margins, the unknowns. That is where her gaze settles. There is no ceremony in this beginning, only rain, only a girl in a palace, pressing her palm to cold glass. And beyond that, the world begins to change. The silence is heavier now. Buckingham Palace breathes with unfamiliar rhythms. Freshly scrubbed floors echo under new footsteps, and drapes once faded by years of indifference now catch the sun in rich crimson folds. The house is being awakened, not by horns or banners, but by her presence. She walks softly, yet each step reshapes the silence. Victoria has moved in. The palace was once a ghost of grandeur, with empty halls and neglected corners, but now it adjusts to her as the skin adjusts to new warmth. Maids dust forgotten banisters, courtiers shuffle with more urgency, ministers arrive in waves. The very walls seem to listen again. You follow her through the East Gallery, where morning light streams through high windows like spilled gold. Her dress rustles, silk upon silk, the fabric too fine for comfort, chosen by others. She stops beneath a portrait of George III and lifts her chin slightly. She studies the face, the madness, the crown, the weight of it, then turns and walks on. There is something newly leonine in her, not ferocity, not arrogance, but presence, an awareness of her position, her breath, her gaze. As if she understands, at last, that history has a room waiting for her, and she has just stepped inside. Down in the gardens, two gardeners whisper as she passes. One removes his cap, nervously. The other, older, nods as if in approval, though he says nothing. Her shadow falls across the hedges as she walks. She does not speak to them. Not yet. But she sees them. Every morning now she reads her red boxes, those leather-bound containers of reports, briefings, the pulse of empire. They arrive without fail, and she reads them thoroughly, long before breakfast. Ministers begin to murmur about her discipline. They expected delicacy. They received steel. The breeze shifts. You're still there. Sir Robert Peel frowns at her resolve. Melbourne, Lord Melbourne, watches her with more softness. He becomes her mentor, guide, perhaps the first man she truly trusts. There is an elegance to his voice, a gentleness that balances her solitude. But he does not patronize. He teaches, and she listens, hungrily. Still, the court whispers. A girl cannot rule. A girl cannot know. A girl cannot last. But already, the lion stirs. She begins to assert herself, first in the arrangement of her household, then in matters of state. She insists on keeping Letson. She challenges Conroy's continued presence. She chooses where she sits, whom she speaks to, when she rises. And in the grand halls where once only men dared echo, her voice rings, still soft, but resolute. There is a mirror in her new chamber, more ornate than any before. She stands before it one evening, the firelight dancing at her back. In her reflection, the gold thread of her gown flickers like embers in motion. But her eyes remain steady. She no longer draws lions. She has become one. Yet, she is not without fear. At night, sleep comes only after long hours of thought. She stares at the canopy above her bed, velvet thick with embroidered vines, and wonders, can I be loved as a queen, or only feared? The echo of footsteps down the hallway answers with silence. She misses Dash. She misses the hidden rose in Kensington. But she does not return. There is no return, only forward. A symbol appears again, the map. This time, it is pinned above her desk, annotated now with tiny pins, inked notes in the margins. Her fingers trace the British Isles, then drift outward, to the vast territories, the colonies, the unnamed frontiers. Her empire is not yet golden, but it gleams faintly, like sunrise over distant water. One evening, during a formal dinner, she rises to speak. Her voice carries not just words, but presence. Even those who doubt feel the hush that falls across the chamber. She does not smile too much. She does not lower her eyes. And when she finishes, they rise, whether by custom or awe, she does not know. But they rise. That night, she walks alone on the palace balcony. The wind lifts her hair. Below, London hums, unaware of the revolution that has already begun, not in factories or in law, but in her. She presses a hand to her chest and feels it, the weight, the fire, the story. And so, the lion wakes, not roaring, not clawing, but with a slow, deliberate breath. She is queen, and the world begins to watch. That night, the ballroom echoes with the whisper of silk and the distant rhythm of a waltz not yet begun. The chandeliers hang like constellations suspended in golden cages, and the scent of polished wood and faint lilac powder drifts gently through the corridors. Outside, the snow clings to the eaves, silent and soft, but within, the air stirs, nervous, expectant. Victoria sits, hands folded in her lap, pretending calm as her heart murmurs an unfamiliar song. She is queen now, yes, but also a girl. And in this moment, the crown feels no heavier than a glance across the room. Across an ocean of courtiers and candlelight, a young man arrives. His name is Albert, Prince of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, cousin, stranger, mirror. He moves with the stiffness of expectation, but there is something quiet in his eyes, something that does not reach for her throne, but listens for her silence. They meet not in spectacle, but in something subtler. He bows, She smiles. A pause lengthens, golden and fragile, and something unspeakable plants its root. You pass another closed door. Their first conversations are short, polite, and conducted beneath the vigilant stares of protocol. But behind the stiffness, something grows, tentative as the first crocus in winter soil. He speaks of poetry, of music, of German forests veiled in mist. She responds with laughter that surprises her. It is not rehearsed. It is not royal. It is real. A recurring metaphor stirs. The map. But this time, not of territory or empire, of heart. A map of selves, slowly unfolding. She begins to redraw the borders of her solitude and finds that Albert fits within them, not as conquest, not as protector, but as companion. A bell rings again, softer this time. Victoria writes in her diary, "He is so sensible, so kind, so pleasing." The ink pools on the page like breath held too long. Her script is neater than usual, each word a petal pressed into history. They are both young, both shaped by rooms too large and childhoods too small. They speak through shared glances more than bold declarations. He does not flatter. He observes. He does not instruct. He suggests. And in that gentleness, she begins to unfold, not as monarch, but as woman. London, meanwhile, watches with narrowed eyes and curious hearts. A foreign prince? A match of bloodlines? Whispers bloom like frost on glass. But Victoria is not concerned with gossip. She is concerned with gravity, with the pull of this presence, with the calm in his hands. She proposes to him, not from tradition, but from certainty. It is she who must ask, by virtue of her crown. Yet in her voice, there is no command, only warmth. Albert accepts, not for power or gain, but because her eyes hold something he cannot look away from. And so, in the deep folds of winter, an engagement begins that will not merely decorate the throne, but redefine it. The mirror returns. She sees herself reflected, no longer alone. His figure stands behind her, blurred by distance, but unmistakable. The image does not frighten her. It comforts. Together, they are less myth, more breath. They exchange letters thick with longing and reflection. His German script is fine and serious. Hers, blooming with affection. They write of fears, of hopes, of faith and art. In those words, the future begins to write itself, not in proclamations, but in poetry. The public ceremony will come, and with it jewels, hymns, and the rattling of carriages. But here, in these quiet moments, this is where the real union takes shape. And still, the snow falls. She walks in the gardens one morning, the frost crunching beneath her boots, a letter folded inside her glove. Her cheeks are pink from cold, but her smile is unguarded. She is not just Victoria Regina, not just the lion, the sovereign. She is a girl who has found an echo. He will come again soon. And when he does, it will not be for politics or pageantry. It will be for her. In a palace lit by 1,000 candles, a single flame now means more. And somewhere deep in her chest, where even duty cannot reach, she whispers it once more. Albert. The silence stirs with a hiss. Not the hush of court, nor the quiet of velvet chambers, but a new kind of breath, hot and restless. Outside Buckingham Palace, the world no longer sleeps in stillness. It churns, rattles, and awakens. Trains slice through countryside like ink across parchment, their smokestacks coiling into heaven's gray. The age of steam has arrived, and with it, the world reshapes itself beneath Victoria's watchful gaze. She stands at the window, roses in bloom below, iron in motion beyond. The garden, so carefully ordered, holds a strange contrast now. Birds flit from branch to branch, unaware that miles away, steel rails have replaced soil, and soot falls gently upon fields where sheep once grazed without hurry. Victoria places a hand on the glass. She hears the faint echo of a whistle, somewhere far, yet inevitable. She is no engineer. She will not build the tracks. But the kingdom now stretches with veins of fire and iron, and she, unwittingly, is its pulse. Ash drifts in the quiet. Albert, now her husband, walks beside her in the gallery. He speaks of locomotives, of architects, of modern marvels with the same reverence others reserve for scripture. His mind is drawn not to jewels, but to rivets, not to hunting, but to harmony. She listens, not just as wife, but as sovereign, and marvels at his certainty. He sees the future in diagrams. She feels it in the air. London thrums now with a new heartbeat. Markets stir with voices foreign and familiar. Gaslights bloom like stars along the Thames. Carriages must yield to iron horses. Children press their faces to grimy panes, watching engines roar past like dragons with red mouths and black breath. The palace grows quieter by contrast, even as its queen expands. Victoria finds herself torn between the calm of morning letters and the tempest of a nation redefining itself. She writes more now, not just diaries, but dispatches, observations, approvals. Her pen moves faster, her days more crowded. And still, each night, she returns to Albert's voice beside her, grounding, warm, and filled with wonder. In the rose garden, the scent of blossoms lingers beneath a new odor. Coal. It isn't unpleasant, but unfamiliar. The gardeners, once solitary and slow, now share gossip of railways and factories. Even among flowers, the age has arrived. A symbol returns. The mirror. But this time, its glass reflects movement. Her figure blurred by the blur of change. It is no longer just her face, but the world behind her, in motion. She watches herself grow older in that reflection, not in age, but in clarity, in presence. One afternoon, Albert arranges a demonstration, a short rail journey meant for the royal party. Victoria is hesitant, but when the train begins to move, when the countryside blurs into green and gold, when the air rushes through the open windows like a baptism, she feels something new, exhilaration. She is not carried. She is flying. The wind in her hair, the rumble beneath her bones. It awakens something hidden, not the past, not tradition, but momentum, the sense that life moves forward not just by ceremony, but by courage. They arrive at the station, greeted by cheers. She smiles, not the rehearsed smile of royalty, but the real one. And that evening, as Albert holds her gloved hand in his, she confesses, "I understand it now." He says nothing, only squeezes her hand gently, the way one acknowledges a shared secret. The world opens. Canals widen. Telegraph lines begin to thread across counties like silver veins. Ideas travel faster. So does dissent. But Victoria, grounded in her role, grows not fearful, but curious. In Parliament, voices argue over labor, reform, tariffs. Outside, the working classes begin to stir. But the Queen, distant yet present, continues to write, to read, to learn. She begins to see the complexity of her realm, not as a stage for her rule, but as a living thing, with suffering and brilliance interwoven. The lion within her does not sleep, but it does pause, observing the new landscape with wary awe. In the palace greenhouse, roses continue to bloom. Steam settles on the glass each morning, clouding the view, then slowly vanishing. Victoria walks there often, breathing the damp sweetness of petals and earth. Yet beyond the ivy-covered arches, London bellows, machines hum, and the future charges forward. She cannot stop it. She does not wish to. Instead, she holds both truths, that beauty still grows in silence, and that thunder now travels by rail. That night, The fire crackles low in the royal parlor, casting amber tongues of light across the polished floor. The scent of cedar and old books lingers in the air, thick with a warmth that does not come from temperature alone. You step closer, past the wainscoted walls and velvet drapes, and see Victoria seated by the hearth, her eyes following the flicker of flame like it holds a secret. A letter rests on her lap, unopened but not unread. The palace is quiet, yet not still. Outside, London pulses with heat of another kind. Reformers gather in taverns and salons, voices sharpening over tea and ink. Pamphlets flutter through alleyways, pages folded in protest. Men speak not just of law, but of rights, of what is owed to the laborer, the woman, the child too thin to run. The fire in the Queen's parlor echoes the ones being lit in tenements across the city. She knows. She reads everything. In her chamber, the red box brings not only dispatches from abroad, but from within. Debates in commons, petitions from cotton mills, the cries of Chartists rising like smoke from coal-choked streets. She listens not with panic, but with a deepening quiet, the kind that precedes understanding. And in this quiet, a symbol returns, the hearth. It is not merely a place of comfort, it is a crucible, a place where things are melted down, reformed, made new. Here, the Queen does not merely warm her hands, she warms her mind. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Albert enters, holding 2 books beneath his arm, one political, one poetic. He hands her the first, but she chooses the second. She is learning to balance, to sense the rhythm between what must be ruled and what must be felt. He smiles, not indulgent, but proud. He does not lead her. He walks beside. Together they sit by the fire, reading in silence, broken only by the occasional question. What do you think of this passage? Or, do you believe they are right? Their parlor becomes a parliament of 2. Later, a guest arrives, Lord Melbourne, welcomed as both mentor and measured dissent. They speak of reform bills, of voting rights, of unrest in the north. He tempers her fears, reassures her resolve. But even he sees it now. This young queen is not content to reign by rote. She listens. She asks. She changes. Outside, in the drawing rooms of London's intelligentsia, the word reform flickers like a matchhead in the dark. The factories of Manchester hum with labor and resentment. The streets swell with faces both hopeful and worn. In these murmurs, the fire grows. Victoria feels it in her bones. One evening, she insists on visiting a hospital. Quietly. No ceremony, no parade, just observation. She walks among rows of the wounded, the sick, the forgotten. Children with hollow eyes. Women stitched too late. Men broken not by battle, but by work. She returns without words. But in her diary, a single line appears. I have seen the soul of my kingdom. She does not sleep easily that night. The silence is heavier now. In the parlor, the fire burns lower, but does not die. She adds another log, watches the ash rise, and thinks not of empire, but of faces, of coal dust in the folds of lace, of reform not as threat, but as truth, a reshaping. Albert places a hand on hers. No words pass between them. None are needed. The next morning, Victoria writes a letter, longer than most, to Parliament, to her people. Not read aloud, not broadcast, but it exists. It marks something, a shift. The lion within her is learning nuance, not only the growl, but the pause, the study, the fire that warms, not scorches. Back in the parlor, the flames settle into rhythm. Outside, dawn arrives over the chimneys of London, steam curling like question marks into the gray sky. And somewhere in the city, a child wakes, unaware that the Queen thought of her the night before. The rain returns, not in storms or violence, but in a soft and steady murmur against the high windows of Buckingham Palace. It blurs the view, softens the corners of the day. You walk slowly through the study, past curtains drawn close against the cold, until you reach her desk. A simple mahogany surface scattered with parchment, ribbon-bound letters, and a small ink pot still wet at its rim. There, the Queen writes. It is morning, but not early. The lamps still burn gently. A cup of untouched tea sits cooling beside a paperweight shaped like a lion. A candle gutters quietly. The world outside may rush, may shout, but here, in this pause between obligations, Victoria listens to the page. She writes not from command, but from longing, to understand, to feel, to tether herself to the pulse of her people. Her pen glides, falters, begins again. One letter to her uncle in Belgium, another to a governor in India, one to her mother, another to a girlhood friend now distant by both marriage and memory. These are not the proclamations of a sovereign. They are echoes. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The rain taps louder for a moment, as if insisting on its presence. Victoria looks up. The garden is a blur of green and gray beyond the glass, its shapes softened, its thorns quieted. Her thoughts drift, not just across the channel, but across the world. For the empire is growing. The red map spreads. Dispatches arrive with news of trade ports and treaties, of new viceroys and strange storms off the Cape. India expands beneath the company's banner. Hong Kong gleams newly claimed. Jamaica wrestles with the ghosts of slavery recently undone. Everywhere, the Queen's name is printed, engraved, whispered. And yet, she does not see it. Not firsthand. She knows the world through letters. Albert, too, reads beside her. He marks passages in foreign reports, drafts questions for ministers, sketches railways that might one day span mountains. They exchange pages silently, their glances communicating what words cannot. They are not only partners, they are twin compasses, drawing circles across a globe that only partially answers them. That day, a letter arrives from the Punjab, thick parchment, faint rose scent. The script is elegant. A prince, young, writing in honor and curiosity, signs it with a hand trembling between custom and hope. Victoria reads it slowly, aloud. When she finishes, she falls silent. A bell rings again, softer this time. She wonders, who are these people writing to her? What do they imagine when they picture the Queen? A ghost in lace? A statue in marble? A mother? A myth? She returns to the page. Her reply is careful, gracious, curious. There are no direct commands, no imperial stiffness, just a gesture of recognition, a pause in the thunder of rule to speak as one human to another. Later that week, she receives a stack of children's drawings from Liverpool. A school has sent portraits of Her Majesty the Queen. Crayon smudges, wobbly crowns. One depicts her with angel wings, another with spectacles. She laughs, the sound echoing warmly in the small room. Then, without hesitation, she writes them back. She tells them, I am grateful for your drawings, and I hope you will always cherish your studies, for the mind is the greatest jewel. The letter is brief, but in it, the Queen becomes real. A symbol returns, the mirror. Not the one in her chamber, but a metaphorical one now. These letters, this correspondence, reflect not only the world to her, but her to the world. In each penned reply, a version of Victoria is born anew, not just monarch, but mind, hand, breath. The rain slows. She dips her pen again. A note to a clergyman, a condolence to a widow, a question to the Royal Society about a comet recently charted in the southern skies. The questions matter, not only for policy, but for presence. These letters are her lifeline, thin threads across vast waters, reminding her that the empire is not a crown. It is people, stories, moments. And as the final raindrops slide down the pane, she seals another envelope. Her wax stamp presses down gently, not with force, but with care. Outside, The streets glisten. A messenger mounts his horse. The wheels of a carriage splash into motion. The letters leave the palace, carrying with them something far greater than instruction. They carry curiosity, humility, and a woman who, despite her power, chooses always to write. And somewhere, in a distant room, a child, a scholar, a prince, will open a page touched by a hand that holds half the world. That morning, the air smells not of roses or rain, but of glass warmed by sunlight and wood newly sawed. You drift through Hyde Park, where the trees stand stunned, holding their breath before something never seen before, something vast, shimmering, impossible. The Crystal Palace rises in the distance, a colossus of glass and iron, delicate as lace and massive as myth. It does not belong to the earth, yet here it is, glinting like a dream made solid. Victoria stands at its threshold, her gloved hands folded tightly, her breath catching not from fear, but from awe. Even Albert, usually composed and professorial, seems momentarily silenced. His idea, his great ambition, now towers above them, humming with the soft vibrations of a world being invited to witness itself. The great exhibition has begun. Inside, beneath the vaulted canopy of transparent sky, nations converge. Machines breathe steam beside silk gowns from India. Gilded pianos share space with seed drills and early daguerreotypes. A whale skeleton from the Americas looms beside a loom that whispers of Manchester's future. And at the center of it all, people. Thousands. Awed, curious, restless. Victoria moves among them not as distant monarch, but as one of many, slightly apart, yet deeply present. Her skirts brush marble, her eyes catch every detail. She listens, she notes, she marvels. The breeze shifts. You're still there. Albert walks beside her, his joy barely concealed. This is his cathedral, his heart. And though the world credits the Queen, she gives him the moment entirely. She sees what it costs him: sleepless nights, parliamentary doubt, the slow erosion of health he keeps hidden behind bright eyes. She takes his hand gently, unseen by most, and holds it as if anchoring him to the very world he helped shape. The symbol of the mirror returns, not literal now, but refracted in the palace's every pane. The world reflects upon itself. Each visitor sees their country, their craft, their corner of humanity gleaming beneath a shared sky. It is not empire in conquest. It is empire in spectacle, and it dazzles. Yet, in the shadows between the marvels, tension whispers. A weaver from Lancashire stares too long at a French loom. Will it replace him? A West African observer reads the labels beside artifacts taken from his land. A young child sells lemonade outside, forbidden to enter. Progress gleams, but so do its edges. Victoria senses it. She cannot unsee what glitters, but she does not yet see what it costs. Still, she believes in the vision, in unity through display, in the potential of human ingenuity when laid bare like this, not behind the curtains of war, but in halls of shared wonder. She gives a speech. It is brief, heartfelt, and she does not stumble. When she says the words peace and industry in brotherhood, she means them. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. That night, in her study, she writes again. She describes the colors, the music, the smell of the palms planted beneath the great dome. She writes of Albert's pride, of a child who clutched her skirt without realizing whose gaze he met. She writes not for posterity, but for memory, so that it may never dull. London shifts around the palace. Vendors sell miniatures. The press prints illustrations and essays by the hour. Europe sends diplomats. Even America, hesitant and raw, contributes a daguerreotype machine and a model farmhouse. The palace becomes a beacon, not just of Victoria's reign, but of something intangible, belief in human progress. But progress is a mirror with cracks. In the poorer districts of London, where coal smoke chokes narrow lanes and children work barefoot in spinning rooms, The Crystal Palace feels distant, too bright, too polished. The Queen knows this, vaguely. Letters hint, reports suggest. But for now, the dream remains intact. The exhibition will close. The glass cathedral will move to another home, but its shadow will remain on cities, on hearts, on futures. Victoria watches from the steps one final time. The sunlight catches in the roof, throwing fractured halos across the lawn. She does not speak, but something in her posture says it clearly. This is what we can be, not what we are, not yet, but what we might, just might, become. That day, the city doesn't hum, it pounds. You step into the streets beyond the palace gates, where the heart of the empire beats not with music, but with motion. Iron on iron, leather on belt, the clang of hammer on anvil, the whistle of steam, the cry of gulls overhead, lost between factories and river smoke. This is London's new rhythm, a pulse forged not in silk parlors, but in soot-darkened alleys and blazing foundries. Here lies the machine, and at its heart, the people. Victoria hears it all, faintly, even from her towered rooms. She hears it in the pace of petitions that now arrive by the hour, in the calls for labor laws, for shorter hours, for cleaner air and safer hands. In the voice of Albert, who walks beside her garden path one gray morning and says, "Industry must serve, not only flourish." You pass another closed door. Down in Manchester, in Leeds, in Birmingham, looms rise like iron trees. Men feed coal to mouths that never cool. Girls with pinched cheeks tie bobbins in near darkness. Boys with fingers too small to bruise the gears climb where grown men cannot. These children do not read the Queen's letters, but they bear her name, and still, the machines do not pause. Victoria reads a report, its spine stiff, its pages crisp with ink that smells of urgency. It describes a mill accident, limbs lost, compensation denied, the overseer fined less than a day's wage. She sets it aside with trembling fingers. Albert looks at her, silent. The fire in the hearth crackles, uncomfortably loud. A symbol returns. The mirror. It is no longer in her chambers, but in every printed pamphlet, in every article sent to her desk. The empire sees itself, and what it sees is discomforting. The machine is beautiful in its power, but monstrous in its appetite. And yet, she cannot stop it. What she can do, what she begins to do, is learn. In 1842, she supports a commission, quietly, steadily. Albert joins her, lending voice to the cause of factory reform. She reads the accounts aloud at night, children beaten for sleeping at their looms, women crushed beneath overworked scaffolds. Her voice does not rise. It lowers, heavy with realization. The silence still hums. Soon, Parliament debates. And when the bill passes, limiting child labor hours, she signs it without flourish, but with a pen held more firmly than usual. The ink dries slower that evening, or perhaps her hand lingers on the page. She cannot dismantle the age, but she can temper its cruelty. In the palace kitchens, workers whisper, "She knows." In schools, a new line is added to the morning lesson, that the Queen does not turn her face away. It is not revolution, it is not salvation, but it is something. And in Victoria herself, a change takes root, not sudden, not showy. A growing awareness that to rule is not only to reign, but to respond. One afternoon, she visits a foundry. Her carriage smells of coal before she steps down. The men remove their caps. Their hands are too blackened to offer. She nods and walks among them. The air is thick with ash. Her silk hem turns gray. She does not flinch. A bell rings again, softer this time. She returns home that evening, the scent of the forge still clinging to her coat. Albert says nothing, only places a hand on her shoulder as she sinks into her chair, and outside, in the distance, The machine continues. But now, just slightly, it listens. That morning, the light enters gently through the nursery windows, golden and warm like butter spread across a cold plate. It glows not on velvet or marble, but on linen and lace, on silver rattles, wooden cradles, and the half-folded pages of a lullaby left unfinished. The palace, so often stiff with protocol, breathes here with the hush of early life. You drift through this small room, where monarchy steps aside for motherhood, where Victoria, Queen of the United Kingdom, becomes simply Mama. The infant stirs, not with ceremony, but with a sigh, a small, insistent sound that pierces more than a cannon salute. Victoria moves quickly, her nightdress whispering against the polished floor. She is not attended. Not yet. This moment is hers alone. She bends to lift her child, cradles him with a tenderness that surprises even herself. The crown is nowhere in sight. The child does not care. He only wants her warmth, her voice, the smell of skin that still remembers the sea of birth. Victoria hums. Ash drifts in the quiet. The morning unfolds in quiet rituals. A swaddled embrace, a rocking chair beneath a window, a book balanced on one knee. The world outside may demand decisions, treaties, reforms, engagements, but here, time pauses. Here, her body is not an emblem, but a vessel. Here, her hands are not for signatures, but for soothing. She is young still, barely past girlhood, yet her lap now holds a future monarch. Prince Edward, the heir. But she does not yet see him as such. He is just her baby, round-faced, blinking, reaching for curls not yet grown. Albert enters without knocking. His boots are soft, his eyes are tired but joyful. He leans over the crib, kisses the baby's forehead, then hers. They do not speak much in this room. They don't need to. Here, they are not sovereign and consort. They are two hearts orbiting a smaller one. A recurring symbol returns. The mirror. But this one is small, handheld, resting near the basin. Victoria picks it up absently, catches her reflection with the child against her breast. She sees the curve of her tired eyes, the way her mouth curls slightly downward in concentration. It is not the mirror of ceremony or command. It is the mirror of self, unvarnished, human. Later, the governess arrives. A bow, a curtsy. The child is taken gently, tended to. The moment passes, and the queen returns. Letters await. Meetings. The rustle of parliament. The engine of state roars softly in the corridors beyond the nursery. But a part of her resists. She lingers in the hallway, fingers brushing the embroidered bib still damp from milk. She smiles, not with pride, but with recognition. She has become something more. But it is not always sweetness. Motherhood brings exhaustion, guilt, fear. Her duties pull her from the cradle more often than she wants. Ministers grumble when she delays. Newspapers murmur about over-sentimentality. Even Albert, with all his care, cannot always reach her when she curls inward, anxious over the fragility of life. There are nights when the baby coughs, and she sits upright, breath caught. There are days when she writes of being torn, of not knowing how to split her soul between nation and nursery. Still, she tries. In the gardens, she walks with the child in a pram. Ladies in waiting follow at a distance. Guards nod. But she sees only the flutter of leaves above them, hears only the giggle that erupts as a squirrel dashes across their path. She laughs with him, and for a heartbeat, all the thrones in the world could burn, and she would not turn away from that sound. The silence is heavier now. The press calls her a domestic queen. They mean it half-mockingly, but she does not mind. If ruling means seeing her child safe, if monarchy means lullabies as well as manifestos, then she will wear both crowns. The nursery grows. More children arrive. each with their own cry, their own shape, their own corner of her heart. She writes of them endlessly in her diary, documenting not their titles, but their tantrums, their toys, their soft sighs as they fall asleep. To the world, they are future alliances. To her, they are breath. Yet the demands do not lessen. Foreign policy weaves through her mornings. Letters from Canada, unrest in Ireland, plans for a new bridge over the Thames. She attends to them. She must. But each time she sets down her quill, her mind drifts back to the creak of the cradle, the warmth of a sleeping child curled into her chest. The mirror watches. She ages slowly in its eyes, but something in her softens, deepens. The lion does not retreat, but learns to lie beside the lamb. And each dawn, before the nation rises, she visits the nursery once more, just to watch them breathe. That morning, London doesn't rise. It exhales. You wander through the streets before the carriages stir, before the bells ring out over the bridges. The fog hangs low, not like mist, but like breath held too long. It coils between chimneys and curls beneath the arches of Blackfriars Bridge. The cobblestones are slick with damp, and the air smells of coal smoke and old bread. A city waking in ash. This is not the London of royal portraits or ballads sung in drawing rooms. This is the London of shadows, of lamplighters still descending ladders, of scavengers sweeping soot into sacks, of coughing children gathering kindling beneath gas-lit doorways. And still, in this choking hush, life moves forward. Victoria sees it now, not as myth or headline, but as proximity. In car rides taken without fanfare, in unannounced visits to hospitals, in her drives through the East End, where the streets are narrower and the roofs lean closer together like secrets being exchanged. She leans forward in her seat, veil lifted slightly, eyes searching the alleys with something deeper than curiosity. The palaces shine, yes, but the kingdom suffers. A child with blistered hands begs beneath the arch of a crumbling factory. A woman, no older than 20, holds an infant wrapped in newspaper. The rain doesn't fall. It hovers, suspended, reluctant. The fog absorbs it, makes the whole world quiet. The silence is heavier now. At court, they tell her not to look too closely, that some things are simply the cost of greatness. That industrial progress must be borne, but Victoria no longer accepts that easily. Not now. Not after hearing the echo of her name shouted between coughing fits in the alleyways of Spitalfields. She returns to the palace and asks for reports, not from ministers, but from reformers, from doctors, from school teachers writing on slates in broken schoolhouses. Her desk becomes a second street, cluttered with accounts of suffering more precise than any battlefield dispatch. Albert watches, encourages, grieves. In a meeting with Parliament, Victoria supports a public health bill, her voice gentle but iron-threaded. The city needs clean water, sanitation, light, dignity. She doesn't scream, she doesn't demand, but she insists. A candle flickers, your breath slows. The symbol returns, not the mirror this time, but ash. Ash on her gloves after visiting a poorhouse. Ash in the folds of her gown after passing through a coal-slicked train yard. Ash as the silent witness, what remains after the flame, what cannot be ignored. She walks through the palace gardens after such visits, trailing soot behind her. The roses bloom still, unbothered. But she is not. She knows now that roses do not bloom in soot. Not without care. Not without cost. Even in her diary, the tone shifts. The suffering is greater than I imagined. I must not be blind. She writes more frequently now, not for memory, but for clarity. Her words become sharper, less adorned. The fog is no longer poetic. It is political. And outside, the fog lingers. London becomes both beacon and burden, a city of lights and lungs, of brilliance and bronchitis. The queen walks a line between reverence and responsibility. She cannot undo the past, but she can light a path forward. She writes to her children about what she sees, about what must be done. She does not shield them, not from this. The ash must be seen, must be touched, if the future is to be different. And each time she returns to the nursery, to the warm walls and soft blankets, she carries the weight of the city's children with her. The fog presses against the windows, but inside, something brightens. The queen is no longer only sovereign, she is witness. That night, a breeze carries the scent of spice and paper through the west-facing windows. The lanterns in the palace halls flicker gently as you follow the echo of distant chimes, not English, not familiar, but rich and low, like bronze calling out across continents. In the queen's drawing room, a parcel rests on a silk-covered table. Its contents glimmer in the candlelight. A bell, carved and cast in the Punjab, delicate as lace, but heavier in meaning than gold. Victoria lifts it carefully. She does not ring it. Not yet. She is used to gifts, paintings, jewels, curiosities, but this one feels different. There is no inscription, no explanation, just the shape, the weight, and the soft resonance of a place too far to know by name alone. India. The jewel in the crown she has not yet worn. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Albert reads beside her, head bowed over a thick volume on Eastern architecture. They've begun studying together, not as pastime, but as pilgrimage. The East is more than rumor now. It is part of the realm, part of her. The symbol returns, the map. This time, it is not pinned on a desk, but etched in her mind. The red stretches further now, deep into the subcontinent, where rivers curl like calligraphy and empires older than hers now kneel beneath foreign flags. She studies the curves of Bengal, the shadows of the Deccan, and the jagged edges of Afghanistan. They are no longer abstractions. They are governed in her name. But what does that name mean there? She asks her ministers. The answers are polished, rehearsed, about commerce, civility, order. She hears none of it. Instead, she reads letters from missionaries and sepoys, from English women trying to learn Hindustani, from Maharajas whose loyalty is written in polite prose but shaded with resignation. The bell rests in her palm. A bell rings again, softer this time. She closes her eyes and imagines the sound it once carried, through jasmine-scented courtyards, across temples painted in twilight, in schools, in shrines, in battlefields and bazaars. She sees not conquest, but contradiction. People who serve her and do not know her. People whose prayers are older than her throne. Victoria begins to write. She composes letters to governors and viceroys, not demanding but inquiring. She asks of drought, of schools, of the famine blooming in Madras like a black rose. The answers come slowly, carefully. Still, she presses. In her journals, India begins to appear more frequently, not just as an ornament of empire, but as a presence. She writes of textiles more intricate than any lace in Lancashire, of philosophies more ancient than any sermon at Windsor, of lives outside the British gaze. One afternoon she holds a sari brought by a courtier, woven in silk the color of flame. She fingers the fabric, marvels at the threads. She asks who made it. No one can answer. She sends for someone who might. Her children begin to learn words in Hindustani. At court, whispers rise. The queen is too absorbed, too sentimental. She ignores them. In her private rooms, she reads Tagore, not yet translated but sung to her by a tutor's daughter in broken Bengali. The breeze shifts. You're still there. She dreams one night of mango trees, of warm rain falling on carved sandstone steps. When she wakes, she does not speak. She goes to the bell and rings it once, softly. The sound lingers, impossibly long. It is not guilt she feels. It is presence. She cannot undo what has been done. but she can see it more clearly. She can honor it. Try, at least, to listen. The bell from India sits beside her inkstand now. Ministers move it aside when they bring documents. She always moves it back. And each time she hears its imagined echo, she remembers. The empire is not just land. It is people, stories, grief, beauty, silence. It is more than her crown can hold. That afternoon, the wind carries a whisper of desert warmth into the palace. Not heat, not dryness, but something older, something dust-kissed and sun-baked. You follow the scent into a long chamber where couriers unpack trunks wrapped in leather and silk, each tied with foreign knots. Out spills the empire, not in steel or law, but in gifts. Fabrics, scrolls, spices, and feathers. So many feathers. Bright, iridescent, impossible. Victoria stands amid them, both fascinated and still. The air smells of cinnamon and musk, and the walls seem to hold their breath as an ostrich plume brushes against the hem of her gown. It is pale pink, impossibly light, yet longer than her arm. A note, loosely attached, declares it a gift from a sultan whose name she has never pronounced aloud. She does not speak, only watches the way the feather moves in her fingers, how it curls as if remembering a breeze half a world away. Feathers, so many kinds. Peacock, macaw, quetzal. They come from distant forests and royal aviaries. Some are woven into fans, others crown ceremonial spears or headdresses, but all of them are more than decoration. They carry meaning, spiritual, royal, ancestral. Here, they are repurposed as tribute. There, they were once prayers. You pass another closed door. Ministers gather, delighted. They speak of loyalty, of display, of the soft diplomacy of exotic beauty. Victoria nods, but behind her eyes, something stirs. She has seen how her name precedes these gifts, how her portrait now hangs in halls where her feet will never fall. The symbol returns, the mirror. This time, framed in ivory, presented by an ambassador from Nigeria. She lifts it delicately. Her reflection appears, haloed in carved vines. She does not look away, but she does not smile. Later, in her study, she opens a parcel containing a single page, a painting, watercolor on bark. A bird with its wings spread wide, one wing clipped. It's unsigned. No note. She stares at it long. Ash drifts in the quiet. She walks the halls that evening in silence, her hand trailing along stone warmed by late summer sun. Albert finds her in the greenhouse, surrounded by ferns. He does not speak immediately. When he does, his voice is quiet. Do you think they love us? She does not answer. Not right away. She thinks of the bells from India, the textiles from Ceylon, the ivory from Africa, the gold from Australia, the feathers, all of them, gathered, packaged, bowed. I think they endure us, she says. Still, she preserves everything. Catalogues it, names it, stores it in glass cases. Not as trophies, but as questions. She begins to request stories alongside the objects. Who carved this? Who wore it? What does it mean in the place from which it came? Some stories reach her, many don't. She speaks to her children of these places, encourages their curiosity. They study not just geography, but myth, language, story. She insists on it. Yet the feathers keep arriving, each one a quiet contradiction. Beauty born of something taken, a symbol of flight handed to those who never needed wings. She dreams that night of a flock bursting skyward. Thousands, feathers of every color. They don't fly away. They circle, watching, waiting. The breeze shifts. You're still there. When she wakes, one feather lies on her pillow, white, down soft, likely fallen from her nightgown. But she lifts it gently, holds it in the light. It is lighter than guilt, heavier than innocence. She places it in her journal, presses the page closed. She will not forget. That morning, the corridors are too still. Not the stillness of ceremony, nor of royal order, but the kind that presses on the skin like cloth soaked in grief. Even the clocks seem hesitant, ticking as if unsure they should go on. In the Queen's chamber, the windows are drawn, the candles have burned low, and Victoria is seated at the edge of a bed now empty, its blankets neatly arranged by hands no longer trembling. She does not weep. Not yet. Her hands rest on her lap like folded wings. Albert is gone. The word does not make sense yet, not truly. It hovers like a mispronounced prayer, circling her hair, her breath, her silence. He had fallen ill. The fever came fast, and then the stillness came faster. Doctors whispered, footsteps blurred, the walls closed in. Now, she wears black. And not for a day, or a season. Forever. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The palace darkens, curtains drawn, mirrors covered, music stopped. His desk remains untouched. His coat still hangs on the hook. The roses in the conservatory begin to wilt. Even Dash, now old and slow, lies curled in a corner, sensing what has broken but not understanding why the house no longer hums. Victoria does not eat at table. She dines alone. She does not hold court. She speaks in fragments. Her diaries grow longer, then shorter, then sparse. Her signature still appears on documents, but her soul does not. Parliament waits. Ministers worry. The empire watches. And still, she does not re-emerge. A symbol returns. The veil. Not just fabric, but a wall between worlds. It falls not just over her face, but over her gaze, her presence, her reign. Where once was radiance, now stands shadow. She writes of Albert as if he were still in the room. Sometimes, she believes he is. The silence is heavier now. He is in every room. His photograph sits beside her bed. His letters remain bundled and reread, worn at the edges like beloved books. His voice still echoes in her mind, correcting, guiding, laughing, praying. When she closes her eyes, she can still feel his breath on her temple. But when she opens them, only the veil. The ministers plead for her return. Disraeli, with honeyed words. Gladstone, with stern appeals. She listens, then turns away. She walks the halls of Balmoral instead, letting the wind erase their urgency. She finds a stone bench by the lock and sits for hours. Some days, she does not speak. The mirror, long her companion, stands unused. Dust gathers. She will not face herself. Not like this. Time continues without her. Revolutions rise abroad. New laws emerge. Wars are waged. Yet Victoria remains frozen, as though her reign had been wrapped in a shroud along with Albert's body. She wears black at every public appearance, her face pale beneath the lace. The people call her the Widow of Windsor, but mourning, for her, is not retreat. It is transformation. Ash drifts in the quiet. From her grief, a new presence forms, quieter, more formidable. Not the youthful lioness who once dazzled with waltzes and wit, but a stone figure carved by sorrow. She begins to write again. She consults. She rules, but not with light, with shadow, with memory. She commissions statues, memorials, foundations in his name, his dreams, of education, of architecture, of fairness. She tries to keep alive, not with the same vigor, but with reverence. Balmoral becomes sanctuary. Osborne House becomes temple. Every room a reliquary of the life they built. The veil never lifts. Even as decades pass, even as her children marry, depart, disappoint, even as new subjects are born who never knew a time without black lace and solemn eyes. The queen grieves on behalf of time itself. One night, she stands on the balcony, looking toward the stars. She does not speak, but a single tear trails beneath her veil. It catches the moonlight. It falls. Albert loved the stars. She does not know if he sees her, but she sees him, always. That evening, the air in the highlands tastes of peat smoke and pine needles. You pass through the outer gates of Balmoral, where heather brushes your boots, and the hills seem to lean inward, protective and ancient. The wind hums low between the stones, not with chill, but with memory. Here, grief does not echo. It settles. Victoria walks alone among the trees. Her black dress trails behind her like a curtain of mist. No entourage follows. No court shadows her steps. Only the wind, the soft hush of moss underfoot, and the quiet companionship of the landscape itself. This is not Windsor, crowded with memory, or Osborne, lined with portraits. Balmoral belongs to the earth, and now, to sorrow. The queen breathes in the highland dusk. She comes here often now, to speak with silence. The pine trees do not judge her mourning. The hills do not ask her to return. They absorb. They hold. And in this holding, she finds something close to peace. Not joy, not healing, but stillness. You pass another closed door. Within the castle, candles are lit each night with the same tender order. No servants rush. No shoes click sharply on stone. The light is soft, respectful. In one room, a chair remains empty. His. In another, the writing desk remains untouched since the day he left. She preserves it not out of sentiment, but out of reverence. She believes his spirit lingers here, and perhaps it does. John Brown, a Scottish servant, becomes her daily companion, not of equal rank, never formally acknowledged, but trusted, plain-spoken, loyal. He speaks with the land in his voice, and to him she is simply woman in need. He does not flatter. He does not tiptoe. He tells her the hill paths to walk, the storms to avoid, the herbs that ease her aching head. She listens. Sometimes she even smiles. A bell rings again, softer this time. There are evenings when the queen writes by candlelight, her pen moving slowly over the thick, rough-edged paper Balmoral favors. She does not write of empire. She does not write of politics. She writes of clouds over the cairngorms, of deer grazing in the morning fog, of John's jokes, of Albert's voice in the crackle of the hearth. The highlands hold her grief like a basin. Here, she does not have to speak it aloud. It surrounds her, in the lichen, the loch, the long shadows stretching across the valley. She is not queen here, not truly. She is widow, pilgrim, memory in motion. A recurring symbol returns. The candle. Its flame flickers gently through every room she enters. Not bright, not dramatic, just steady. It warms without conquering. It lights without calling attention. And each flame, she imagines, is a conversation with him. A line of poetry between their two eternities. The breeze shifts. You're still there. Visitors arrive, from time to time, daughters and grandchildren, ministers bearing papers. She receives them, always in black. Her voice is soft, her manner formal, but they notice the change. She no longer seeks approval. She no longer plays host. She simply is. They leave with lowered voices, unsure if they've met the sovereign or the ghost of a woman turned granite. But she does not feel like a ghost. Not here. Here, she feels rooted. The fog rolls in each morning, wrapping the castle in a shroud. The firewood crackles in the hearth. The deer wander the lawns. The path to the cairn, Albert's cairn, is walked daily, slowly. She lays a hand upon the stone each time. Sometimes she speaks. Sometimes she doesn't have to. The candlelight glows late into the night, and somewhere outside, a single owl calls, not as omen, as witness. That morning, frost whitens the palace stones, settling like powdered memory along each cornice and ledge. The guards breathe clouds into the air, but the queen, she does not shiver. You watch her from a distance, wrapped in black, as always, her silhouette motionless against the graying sky. She gazes toward nothing in particular, but something within her is crystallizing. Victoria no longer bends. Time has not softened her mourning. It has preserved it, hardened it, transformed it from raw sorrow into something unmovable. The veil remains, but now it is not just an emblem of grief. It is her uniform, her armor, her monument. Albert is gone, but she has become the stone that remembers him. The girl who once dreamed of lions now stands among marble. In court, ministers tread lightly. Even Disraeli, with his eloquence and bouquets of flattery, cannot breach her solemn reserve. Gladstone meets only her restraint. She grants audiences from a distance, speaks less, writes more. And though she may seem remote, detached, she sees everything. She reads reports with hawk-like precision. No detail escapes her. Her silence is not absence, it is strategy. And though the people complain at times, where is the queen? Why does she not appear? They also respect her. In her mourning, she has become myth, a statue in motion. You almost forget this isn't a memory. In private, she walks the corridors alone. Each portrait passed is a conversation, each echo a name. She still visits Albert's desk, still lays her gloves beside the inkwell. The room is cold, but she does not light the fire. Her warmth is gone with him. Yet, paradoxically, her influence deepens. In the absence of visibility, she becomes a presence too large to challenge. Her signature remains the final word on laws. Her instincts, particularly regarding character, are rarely wrong. She champions those she trusts, condemns those who break her codes. Loyalty, above all, is sacred. And still, she keeps writing. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. Letters to foreign monarchs. Pages upon pages to her children scattered across Europe. Notes to hospital matrons, to rural pastors, to generals overseas. Her handwriting, once looping and light, is now tighter, controlled, but never less intimate. One morning, she walks alone through the sculpture gallery. The bust of Albert catches a shaft of cold sunlight. She pauses before it, hand grazing the marble cheek. Her voice, rarely heard in these halls, murmurs, "They do not forget you." And in her own way, she ensures they never will. A symbol returns, the cairn. Not just the stones at Balmoral, but the weight she carries everywhere. The cairn becomes metaphor, grief built rock by rock, year by year. Not a burden, but a monument she wears inside. She does not crumble. She cannot afford to. Even as new governments rise, as wars flicker in far places, as her empire stretches wider, she remains still. The eye in the storm. The figure who no longer rushes to lead, but never ceases to reign. John Brown, still loyal, still plain-spoken, brings her news and tea in the mornings. His presence, rough-edged and comforting, becomes a tether to the world of wind and rain and living breath. She does not smile often, but when she does, it is often because of him. The breeze shifts. You're still there. Visitors to the palace speak of her presence with awe, a woman carved from duty, veiled by sorrow, crowned by silence. They rarely speak to her long, but they remember her forever. She does not seek beauty anymore. She wears weight. She does not seek praise. She seeks steadiness. The girl who once traced lions on a fogged mirror now carries an entire realm in the stillness of her gaze. She no longer asks the mirror questions. She has become its answer. That afternoon, the map on Victoria's desk spreads wide like parchment skin, creased and aging, but ever expanding. You hover just behind her shoulder, watching as a new line is drawn across a continent older than empire. Africa. Once rendered in blank beige, it now blooms with ink. Territories claimed, railroads imagined, borders drawn not by rivers or mountains, but by decree. The queen traces a name slowly with her finger. Niger. She has never seen it. She will never walk its shores. Yet it will now bear the Union Jack. Dispatches arrive daily, from Lagos, from Cape Colony, from Cairo. They speak of treaties signed, of resistance quelled, of diamonds unearthed and debts declared. A general writes of skirmishes, a missionary, of souls saved, a trader, of ivory. All of them carry her name in their papers, her crest, her image on the coin exchanged for land or loyalty. She reads them all and wonders. You pass another closed door. Outside, the world is changing in long strides. Explorers return with sun-split skin and stories of elephants, of mountain peaks crowned with cloud, of warriors who do not bow. Ministers speak of civilizing, of God and Queen. Victoria listens, her expression unreadable. She no longer interrupts, but she does not nod. The symbol returns, the map. But this time, it resists. For no sooner is a boundary drawn than it shifts again, by rebellion, by weather, by the refusal of those who already lived there. The lines tremble with uncertainty. She senses it. At night, she dreams of footsteps in red dust, of children's laughter in languages she cannot speak, of a crown carried far across the desert, growing heavier with every mile. She wakes before dawn and writes nothing of it. Instead, she orders more reports. The silence still hums. She meets a Zulu ambassador. His robes shimmer, and his eyes, though respectful, do not lower. She asks questions, listens closely. When he leaves, she watches the gold embroidery on his back until the door closes. Later that week, a ship docks in Portsmouth bearing crates of artifacts, shields, spears, fabrics, carved ivory tusks. They are carried into museums, catalogued in Latin. She visits the collection briefly, touches a bead necklace with gloved fingers, asks again, "Who made this?" No one answers. A quiet restlessness settles over her. In her journals, she begins to write of complexity. She admits the contradiction of empire, its glories and its wounds. She writes of African landscapes with a kind of reverence, having never seen them, but somehow sensing their scale. She copies down the names of villages. She tries to pronounce them correctly. In letters to her children, she includes small sketches clipped from dispatches, a giraffe beside a Union flag, a sandstorm rising over railway ties. Her children read them with excitement. She does not. Ash drifts in the quiet. One day she receives a photograph, faded and grainy, a missionary school in Sierra Leone. Children in uniform, hands folded. Their eyes are not pleading. They are watching, assessing. She places it on her desk beside Albert's portrait. It stays there. At night, she walks the gardens of Windsor alone, the breeze cool, the stars impossibly far. She whispers to the dark, "What does it mean to rule where I cannot go?" The wind does not reply, but a branch snaps, and somewhere in the soil beneath her feet, a seed is stirring. Empire, she now understands, is not only built, it is carried, and those who carry it do not always choose to. She no longer draws lines on the map. She watches them appear, and wonders what footsteps will follow. That morning, the corridor hums with voices, light ones, high with youth, but dressed in the heavy fabric of title. You walk behind them, past portraits of monarchs long dead, as boys and girls in polished boots and embroidered collars whisper in French, in German, in English tinted by other lands. They are children, yes, but their names carry the weight of nations. And Victoria, she watches them from her chamber window, fingers steepled, heart caught somewhere between pride and foreboding. Her grandchildren, her blood, her future. Europe is now scattered with her lineage. Daughters sent off in wedding carriages, sons placed in foreign courts, a granddaughter bound for the Prussian throne, a grandson who will one day wear the Kaiser's spiked helm. Even distant Russia bows slightly to her legacy. The queen, now older, cloaked still in black, has not only ruled a kingdom, she has populated empires. You almost forget this isn't a memory. In the music room, they gather. Crown Prince Wilhelm with his clipped salute, little Alexandra of Hesse balancing a teacup too carefully, Prince Arthur pacing with military precision. They laugh, then pause, remembering who might be watching. And she is always watching, not unkindly, but completely. They are not raised as cousins. They are raised as monarchs in waiting. Each child is a puzzle, a treaty, a promise. She studies them as one might study a map, measuring temperaments, observing rivalries, marking potential fault lines between affection and ambition. She knows what happens when families fail to govern themselves. Her own childhood taught her that. The silence is heavier now. The symbol returns, the mirror. This time, it is framed not in gilt or ivory, but in lineage. Victoria sees herself in each grandchild. One carries her stubbornness, another her quick wit, another her temper. And yet, when she looks into their futures, she sees not unity, but storm. Germany, Russia, Britain. The three lions, each wearing her blood, sharpening their claws in separate corners of the continent. She does not speak of it, but she feels it. In letters exchanged, in court gossip, in the way military drills become more frequent. She sees young Wilhelm's eyes harden too quickly. She sees her English sons drift toward politics with less grace than she hoped. She watches Alexandra, delicate and devout, drawn toward mysticism far beyond her grasp. She loves them, but she does not always trust them. One afternoon, she sits with them in the garden, the roses blooming wildly behind them. She tells them of Albert, not as prince, but as father. She speaks of his laughter, his belief in harmony, his dream of peace through family. They listen politely, but fidget. A butterfly lands on her cane, and she does not move. She waits for one of them to notice. Only the youngest does. A bell rings again, softer this time. The elder grandchildren grow restless. They want duties. They want uniforms. They want empires of their own. Victoria sees the hunger in their posture, in their letters, in the way they speak of ships and armies more than books or gardens. She writes to each of them separately, personal notes, counsel, caution. To rule is not to own, she writes. It is to carry. Strength is not noise, but steadiness. You must learn to see before you act. She doubts some of them will understand, but she must try. In her private chapel, she prays not for her own soul, but for theirs. For the children who carry swords etched with her name. For the girls who will marry kings with uncertain eyes. For a world that may soon forget how fragile crowns truly are. The child emperors play again the next day, but their games sound different now, less like tag, more like drills. Victoria watches from her window. The light falls across her face, drawing the lines deeper. She closes her eyes and sees not a family tree, but a battlefield. The roses rustle in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, thunder waits. That afternoon, the sky above Windsor is washed in that peculiar English gray, neither heavy nor light, but softly unmoving. The Queen sits at her desk, pen poised, paper smoothed before her like a still pond. Around her, the room carries the scent of parchment, old wood, and lavender oil. Outside, a bird calls once, sharp, lonely. She does not look up. Her hand moves. The letter begins, as they often do, with affection barely veiled by formality. My dear Mr. Disraeli. Her script flows like a stream with stones beneath, not rushed, but firm. Words chosen carefully, but not without warmth. Between her and Benjamin Disraeli, there exists something rare in politics, genuine fondness, mutual curiosity, an intimacy of intellect. She, the queen cloaked in mourning and tradition. He, the prime minister cloaked in metaphors and myth. Both lonely, both hungry for depth beneath the pageantry. Disraeli once called her the fairy queen. She, in turn, gifted him primroses from her garden, the kind Albert had once loved. Now he is ill, weakened, the fire dimmed. And Victoria, wrapped still in widow's black, writes to him not as sovereign to servant, but as friend to friend. You almost forget this isn't a memory. She writes not of policy, not of empire, but of the ache in the joints as seasons shift, of a robin that visits her sill, of the way the rain whispers differently on stone than on glass. There is no title that shields such softness. There is no crown between these lines. A symbol returns, the ink. She dips her pen again and again, each stroke renewing something unsaid. The same ink that signs laws now traces tenderness. She remembers his voice in the drawing room, his fond flattery, his ability to weave politics into poetry. She smiles faintly, remembering how he once compared her to Zenobia, warrior queen of the East. No one else would dare. The silence still hums. The palace feels larger in his absence. Ministers come and go, always deferent, always appropriate, but none write her poems, none call her Victoria the Good, none make her feel seen, not just served. Disraeli had understood. She writes of her children now grown, of the empire grown restless, of the noise and complexity that surround her. She writes of Albert's cairn and the way the moss grows over the stones like time-forgiving sorrow. She does not ask how he feels. She knows. She does not offer comfort. She offers presence. The letter ends not with command, but blessing. May the candle still warm your desk as your words have warmed mine. She seals it with wax and presses her crest, watching the impression hold, not power, but permanence. Then she calls for her footman, not with urgency, but with reverence, and hands him the letter with fingers that tremble only slightly. A bell rings again, softer this time. Later that week, his reply arrives. It is shorter. His hand shakes now, but the wit remains. The sparkle, though dimmer, still dances between the lines. He writes, I hear your voice when the wind moves the curtains. She reads it 3 times. The next morning, the roses on his windowsill are blooming. She sends more, not with message, not with explanation, just primroses, wrapped in linen, as if spring could reach his bedside through scent alone. The breeze shifts. You're still there. When he dies, she does not speak for hours. Then she writes. 3 pages. Private. Sealed. Placed in a drawer beside his photograph. No one will read them. But in that letter, and in those before it, the queen becomes more than monarch. She becomes companion, witness, heartbeat on paper. And somewhere, across time, the ink does not dry. It lingers. That morning, the mist rises slow from the River Tay, curling like ribbon through the steel girders of a new bridge not yet complete. You stand with the wind at your back, soot on your coat, and listen, not to bird song or bells, but to the distant churning of engines, the hiss of steam, the clatter of iron wheels on iron rails. The world is no longer stitched by footpaths or ships alone. Now it is laced with tracks, bridges of purpose, arches of ambition. Victoria does not see the bridge firsthand, but she hears it, in reports, in letters, in the proud words of engineers who bend nature toward geometry, and in the quieter stories of navvies who sleep beneath their scaffolds, of widows who light candles beside unfinished beams, of trains that will someday carry messages faster than morning. The empire is not just expanding. It is accelerating. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The Queen studies her maps differently now. Rail lines inked in spidery red across England, Scotland, Wales. But not only here, across India, across Canada, Africa, Australia. Lines that suggest unity, speed, power. But she knows what lies beneath them. Labor, risk, the tremble of bolts under storm-weighted iron. She remembers the Tay Bridge disaster, the storm that came howling in 1879 and pulled the great bridge down like paper into the river's black mouth. 75 lives gone in minutes. The Queen mourned privately, then publicly. She wrote to the families, ordered inquiries, asked whether such speed was worth such fragility. Still, the bridges rose again. The silence still hums. Albert would have loved them, would have walked their frames with childlike wonder, speaking of tension and load, of rivets and reach. She imagines his hands moving through the air, sketching ideas no one else can quite follow. His belief in progress remains a ghost beside her. In London, the rail stations become cathedrals, arched and echoing, glass ceilings that hold not heaven, but timetables. Victoria Station, Paddington, Waterloo. She has visited them all, often quietly, watched the travelers, watched the way war letters and wedding dresses travel now by the hour instead of the week. The train becomes her chariot. She boards the royal coach with its polished wood, its discreet curtains, its soft wheels that carry her across distances once unimaginable. She sits alone sometimes, watching villages pass in a blur, each with its church spire, its row of cottages, its child waving as the train vanishes toward another city. And then there are the telegraphs, lines strung like webbing across the world, dots and dashes that speak faster than voice. She receives them now alongside her red dispatch boxes. She learns of births, deaths, riots, and coronations within hours. The world shrinks. Time tightens. And yet, she feels further from it all. A symbol returns. The smoke. No longer rising from hearths, but from engines. It blurs the sky, darkens the hems of her dress, and curls into the crevices of the world. It is progress. It is cost. It is the price of presence. She writes to a governor in Australia, astonished by a letter that arrived in mere weeks. She praises a new railway in Canada that links coasts she's never seen. She receives photographs of her face, printed and posted, in stations thousands of miles away. A passenger once wrote that even the birds in Bombay seem to know her name. Still, she wonders, what travels faster, love or empire? Ash drifts in the quiet. One evening, she rides alone, dusk bleeding across the window pane. The rhythm of the train rocks her gently, like a lullaby recited by steel. In her lap lies a letter from her eldest daughter in Berlin. In her mind, the memory of Albert boarding a train for their honeymoon, the windows wet with rain. She does not weep. She listens. The bridge ahead is strong, but the wind, as always, is watching. That dusk, the light falls across London like a veil of gold. But beneath it, something fractures. You walk slowly through the West End, where carriages rattle past tea rooms and gentlemen tip their hats to polished window panes. The shops gleam with ivory-handled parasols and brocade. The air smells of perfume, cigar smoke, and lilies bought by the dozen. But listen closely. Beneath the rustle of silk and the tapping of heels, there is a sound you cannot ignore. A crack. Faint. Relentless. Victoria sits near her window at Buckingham, watching the gas lamps bloom along the Mall. The city looks serene from here, painted in sunset, wrapped in ceremony. But she knows this isn't the whole story. She knows that just beyond the fine streets lie others, darker, narrower, forgotten. The Queen reads a report in her lap. Thin paper, too thin for what it contains. Statistics, sketches, testimony. Housing records from the East End. One child per bed. Two, in some cases. Sewage rising through floorboards. Mothers scrubbing steps for pennies while coughing blood into handkerchiefs. She closes her eyes. The silence is heavier now. The ministers speak of prosperity, exports, trade, factories running day and night. They speak of progress, and it's true, in part. The empire gleams. But Victoria hears another story in the background noise, one of hunger, of soot beneath fingernails, of boys working mines by candlelight. She writes to her daughter, Princess Helena, who works with nurses. She asks for more accounts, unfiltered. What are they seeing? What are they hiding from her in the name of protection? What she receives is not comfort. A drawing, a boy with rickets and bright eyes. A letter. He said he wants to be a chimney sweep because they get to see the sky. Victoria cannot bear to finish her supper. The symbol returns, the street, but no longer the cobbled, carol-sung pathway of romance. Now it is split, part paved in gold leaf and part in ash. One path for the procession, the other for the invisible. She rides through the poorer boroughs in disguise, not often, not easily, but enough to know. She sees a woman bathing her child in a tin basin, whispering stories to distract from the cold. She sees an old man feeding birds bread he cannot spare. She sees a girl selling violets at dusk, her hands purpled with cold, her eyes wide with things she should not know. You almost forget this isn't a memory. She returns to the palace and writes not in her diary, but to Parliament. She demands more inspections. She sends money, quietly, without fanfare, to clinics, to orphanages, to women who speak too softly to be heard in commons, but know exactly where the cracks run deepest. But the cracks are not just in stone. They're in trust. In the streets now, a new voice rises, one of unrest. The workers begin to speak more plainly. The journalists write more sharply. The pamphlets no longer flatter. Victoria is called remote, outdated, distant. She reads it all, and she does not argue. She knows the crown sits differently now, no longer as a divine comfort, but as a challenge. She has been queen for decades, and still they suffer, and still they hope. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. She stands at the palace gate one early morning, watching the lamplighters extinguish the last flames of the night. A child runs past, bare feet slapping stone, chasing a rolling apple that is not hers. She watches him vanish around a corner. She doesn't follow, but she doesn't forget. That day, she meets with a reformer she once dismissed. She listens longer than usual. She asks questions. She signs a new order for city sanitation. It is small, insufficient, but it is something. She walks her garden that evening. The roses are in bloom, but beneath them, cracks form in the paths from recent frost. The gardeners will repair them, but only if seen. Victoria kneels, traces one with her hand, not broken, but breaking, and worth saving. That morning, the teacup trembles slightly in its saucer as a servant sets it down. Fine porcelain, painted with delicate cherry blossoms. You walk past the table where steam rises in a slow spiral from the amber surface. The scent is familiar, warm, fragrant, calming, but beneath it lingers something else, distant, bitter. You pause. This is not just tea. This is empire, steeped and poured. Victoria lifts the cup without looking. It is a ritual now, part comfort, part diplomacy. The tea is from Assam, strong and dark, a gift, a commodity, a conquest. She sips. Not quickly. She never drinks quickly. Across the room, a dispatch lies unopened. The Queen does not need to read it to know its contents. Trade. Always trade. Ships between Calcutta and Liverpool, barges down the Pearl River, numbers, losses, gains, but not names, not faces, and not the truth floating just beneath the surface, like leaves never strained. You almost forget this isn't a memory. She remembers the letters from the East, how they began with formal tones and ended with coded urgency. Disruptions in Canton, concern over local insurrections, rising tensions with the Qing. Then came the war, the Opium War, they call it. But war is too tidy a word for what unfolded, too sharp to describe the slow, bitter spread of smoke into lungs, into cities, into centuries. Victoria reads a report describing boxes of poppy pressed into bricks, shipped by sea, traded like coin. Her name appears on documents, permission granted, authority signed. But she never touched the substance, never saw it burn. Still, the weight of it curls inside her like steam. The silence is heavier now. The East India Company has long acted in her name, but beyond her sight. The opium was sold not for luxury, but for balance, to correct the drain of silver, to finance railways, wars, and widows' pensions. And in return, tea, silk, porcelain, a bargain sealed with sorrow. She thinks of the letters from missionaries, pleading with her to intervene, of Chinese merchants who once welcomed British ships, now shattered by the addiction fed from their cargo holds. She wonders what it means to benefit from suffering she has never seen. The symbol returns, the teacup, so small, so refined, and yet, when lifted, it carries the echo of cannon fire down the coast of Guangdong, the weeping of mothers in opium dens, the quiet rustle of profit folded into ledgers. Victoria stares into her cup and sees the empire mirrored in its surface, clear one moment, clouded the next. A bell rings again, softer this time. In court, they speak of trade expansion, of new ports opened by treaty. Hong Kong now British, Guangzhou accessible. The Queen nods, but her thoughts drift elsewhere, to a young boy whose photograph she once saw, eyes hollow, cradling a pipe larger than his arm. She dreams one night of a ship, a merchant vessel, sails taut with wind. Below deck, crates upon crates of poppy. Above deck, a tea chest balanced perfectly on the edge. She wakes before it falls. The next day, she writes a letter, not of blame, not of apology, but of recognition. We must never forget that trade built on suffering is not prosperity, but grief delayed. She does not publish it, but she places it with her diary, for posterity, for reckoning, for herself. Ash drifts in the quiet. Later, she walks the garden paths. A servant offers her another cup. She takes it, feels its warmth, and carries it without drinking. She passes the roses, the greenhouse, the sundial that never keeps quite the right time. She stands before a marble bench and sets the teacup down. Steam curls into the air, lingers, then vanishes. The cup remains. But its silence speaks volumes. That night, the gaslight casts long, flickering silhouettes across Whitechapel's narrow lanes. The cobblestones glisten beneath your feet, fresh with rain or something darker, and the air hums with a tension that has no name. You step quietly through the smoke-touched mist, past windows shuttered against the night, past figures moving just beyond clarity. They are not ghosts. They are women, men, the hungry, the hunted, the watchers, the watched. Victoria does not walk here, not in person, but her name drifts between these shadows, stitched into headlines and whispers, into broadsheets fluttering against sewer grates. The Queen must do something. The Queen must know. You almost forget this isn't a memory. A scream tears through the dark. Then silence. The Whitechapel murders, they call them. Later, Jack the Ripper. But now, it is only fear. No one knows who. No one sees him. Only what he leaves behind. Bodies carefully arranged, messages scrawled in chalk, lives snuffed with deliberate rage. The empire spans continents, yet here In its very heart, terror blooms like mold beneath the crown. Victoria reads the reports. Not one, but many. She reads the names of the women: Mary, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary Jane. Their lives dismissed, their deaths sensationalized. She asks questions. Were they protected? Could they be? Why did no one intervene? The ministers answer awkwardly. They were fallen. Of the night. Common. She does not accept that. Not now. The symbol returns. The gaslight. Once a marker of progress, now a spotlight on absence. For in its glow you see not justice, but the shadows it fails to reach. The places still untouched by order. The faces never seen by law. Victoria writes, not to Parliament, but to the police. Let every effort be made. She demands better lighting, more officers, greater care. She does not demand revenge. She demands prevention. She walks her own chambers in the early hours, veil undone, candle in hand. She thinks of women walking alone in fear, of daughters raised in alleys, of lives that matter whether or not they wear silk or lace. The silence still hums. She dreams of a street that never ends, just shadow upon shadow, the echo of footsteps behind her own. She sees the Queen's silhouette cast on a brick wall. It grows, stretches, then fades. She wakes with a shiver she cannot name. In public, she remains composed. But behind closed doors, she reviews proposals for workhouses, orphanages, refuges for women with no place to sleep. She funds them quietly, speaks with advocates discreetly. These are not acts of policy. They are acts of refusal. Refusal to let fear reign where she does. A bell rings again, softer this time. London keeps moving. The fog rolls in again, as it always does, forgiving the skyline with its gentle haze. But beneath it, the cracks widen. The people begin to question not just the killer, but the city itself. Why do so many disappear before they're missed? Victoria lights another lamp in her chamber. Not to read, to remember. She places the names of the murdered in her diary, not as scandal, but as sorrow. Not because they were royal, because they were not. Ash drifts in the quiet. One evening, she watches a procession from her window. Not of soldiers, of nurses, of women with lanterns, patrolling streets others dare not enter. She nods slightly, unseen, but present. Her candle remains lit long after the last silhouette disappears. She cannot save them all, but she can see them, and she will not turn away. That evening you find yourself in a room not of palaces or parliaments, but of parlors, small, warm, fire-lit places where the curtains are drawn tight and the tea has gone cold. A newspaper is folded on the table, its ink smudged by too many hands. Around it sit women and men, not in rags, but in velvet and wool, their collars pressed, their voices calm, measured, steady. The revolution, it seems, does not always shout. Sometimes it begins in quiet, over a borrowed pen and a page half filled with dreams. Victoria hears them, not all at once, not clearly, but she feels the shift in the air, the way debates now drift into drawing rooms, how petitions arrive not only from laborers and radicals, but from scholars, editors, midwives. The middle class no longer watches. It speaks. And with new voices come new questions. Why must Parliament belong to landowners? Why must women wait to be heard? Why do titles pass in one direction only, down and through the hands of men? What does it mean to belong truly to a nation? You almost forget this isn't a memory. In the palace, Victoria stands before the mirror, not to admire herself, but to check the pin of a brooch, a gift from a suffragist who once sent her a letter lined with rosemary and ink. The note read, "For remembrance, not rebellion." She wore it anyway. The symbol returns, the velvet. Once a fabric of royalty, now lining the coats of orators in pubs, writers in study halls, women's reading circles who quote Tennyson and Darwin in equal measure. Velvet softens, but it also shields. It endures, just like the voices now rising through England's fog. Victoria reads the Times and sees her name beside unfamiliar ones. Elizabeth Garrett, the physician; Josephine Butler, the campaigner; Annie Besant, the writer. She does not know them, but she feels their presence pushing at the palace walls like ivy, persistent, graceful, and unafraid. The breeze shifts. You're still there. She writes in her journal with more edge these days. She respects order, but she understands change. She has become, over decades, a paradox, conservative and reformist. She grieves the loss of old structures even as she signs new ones into law. A reform bill lies on her desk. It will expand the vote, not to all, not yet, but to more than ever before. She signs it with her usual pen. She does not smile, but her hand does not hesitate. Later, she hears of a woman who published a pamphlet beneath a false name for fear of losing her children. Victoria asks to read it. She does. She keeps it. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. One afternoon, a group of women is permitted to present a petition. They curtsy, but not too low. They speak, but not too softly. They ask not for favor, but for fairness. Victoria nods. She thanks them. She watches them leave. She does not promise anything, but she remembers everything. And that night, she pens a line in her diary. They are not asking to be me. They are asking to be seen. In the city, the velvet spreads, not as rebellion, as readiness. Drawing rooms fill with laughter and law. Children learn not just obedience, but opinion. Young girls memorize queens and poets and laws. The people are rising, not with weapons, but with words. Victoria does not fear them. She knows what it means to be underestimated. Ash drifts in the quiet. The empire grows louder. But in the quiet rooms, in the velvet-draped salons and ink-stained desks, something else grows too, something that does not yet have a name, but soon will. That morning, the study glows with a light softened by parchment and memory. The windows are streaked with rain, but the hearth burns gently, casting an amber warmth across the rows of shelves that stretch from floor to crown. You walk slowly between the volumes, spines worn, pages folded, the scent of leather and ink filling the air like a psalm. This is no grand library, no public monument to knowledge. It is quieter, personal, a room not for spectacle, but for thought. And at the center of it all, Victoria sits. Her throne today is a high-backed chair, not carved in gold but lined in velvet. Around her, books, open, marked, annotated. The dispatch box sits unopened at her elbow. The business of empire can wait. This morning belongs to letters, to philosophy, to poets and preachers and quiet revolutions etched in careful hands. You almost forget this isn't a memory. She reads slowly. Not for escape, but for anchor. She reads essays on governance, on spiritual duty, on the future of education and the ethics of science. She reads Darwin, not with offense, but with an inquisitor's calm. She does not panic. She observes. She underlines. A recurring symbol returns. The book. Not as ornament, but as oracle. Each spine holds not just information, but challenge. And Victoria, veiled still in black, engages them not as monarch, but as mind. Her fingers pause over a line in Mill's On Liberty. She closes the book without comment. Later, she opens a letter from a Scottish schoolteacher asking for aid in building a library. She forwards it to her secretary with the note, "These are the true cathedrals." She still governs, still signs orders, still advises and decides. But more and more, her world becomes one of thought rather than action. A queen in twilight, not fading, but reflecting. The silence still hums. Albert would have loved this room. She imagines him beside her, pacing as he read, asking questions, proposing reforms no one was yet ready to hear. His memory still lingers in the margins of books they once read together. His notes, precise, neat, still nestled among her own. She keeps his copy of Cicero close. She rereads his letters, and in doing so, builds a second kind of throne, one constructed not of stone and title, but of pages, paragraphs, and purpose. Each book she finishes becomes a step, each step a reflection. One day, a young woman from a university writes to her, asking whether the Queen believes women should be admitted to higher study. Victoria responds, not with a proclamation, but a story. She writes of her own education, of lessons in silence, of books kept from her hands until she demanded them. She does not say yes or no. She says, knowledge is not loyalty to a cause. It is loyalty to self. A bell rings again, softer this time. In the evenings, she dictates less. She writes more, pages upon pages in her journal, recording not the acts of the day, but the ideas that shaped it. She debates morality. She questions tradition. She rewrites the lines of history not with certainty, but with care. Her grandchildren enter the room sometimes. They ask questions she once asked. Why must we read this? Why Latin? Why politics? She smiles faintly, tells them, because it is not enough to be obeyed. You must also understand. The fireplace crackles. The rain begins again. And still, she reads. One book lies closed at her feet, a biography of a woman mathematician who died young. Another rests on her lap, a novel of love and war. And one more waits on the table, a translation from Sanskrit, gifted by a student she'll never meet. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. In this room, Victoria is not only queen, she is witness, to voices she never heard before, to thoughts that never bowed, to wisdom that cannot be crowned. The throne remains, but it is surrounded now, not by walls or guards or subjects, but by books. And between those pages, she rules still. That evening, the sky over London burns with a light not of day or fire, but of memory kindled into spectacle. You stand among thousands in the wide avenues, the gas lamps lit early, the bells tolling not with grief, but with reverence. From the rooftops, flags unfurl like blossoms after storm. In the air, petals, brass, breath, and something slower, something sacred. This is not merely celebration. It is a vigil of gratitude, and Victoria, after 60 years upon the throne, is no longer simply queen. She is time made visible. The Diamond Jubilee, 60 years of reign, longer than most lives, longer than most dreams. Victoria rides not in black today, but in silver and ivory, her carriage creaking gently over cobblestone streets cleared of ash for one day. Her eyes, faded yet fierce, scan the crowds. She sees not individuals, but a chorus. Some cheer, some weep, some simply watch, unsure if they've come to witness a monarch or a monument. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Her gloved hand lifts in slow arcs. A wave. Not regal. Human. She wears a small crown today, lighter than the weight she truly carries. On her chest, medals glint in the late sun. Honors from lands she's never walked, nations she's only ruled in name. But they are hers all the same. Behind her, the procession stretches for miles. Soldiers from Canada, musicians from India, nurses, students, priests, lords, children. They do not march for empire. They walk for her. Because in her face, they see not power, but presence. Decades of it. They see the woman who never turned away, who mourned and ruled and read and endured. The symbol returns. The flame. It begins in London, a single torch lit atop a tower, then another on a hill in York, then again in Edinburgh, and again in Cape Town, in Delhi, in Kingston, in Sydney. A chain of fire circling the globe, one flame touching another, one life igniting the next. A map not of conquest, but of connection. Victoria knows it is theater, but she also knows it matters. The breeze shifts. You're still there. That night, she returns to the palace. The halls echo faintly, emptied of noise but full of light. Candles line the stairs. In her chamber, a fire crackles low. She removes her crown, her boots, the corset she no longer tightens. Then she sits, alone, as always, and watches the flame dance. She thinks of Albert, of that first day, age 18, standing before a council of men with voices louder than her own. She thinks of the mirror in Kensington, of Dash, of the births, the letters, the wars, the ink, the ink, the ink. She thinks of the hands that built the empire and the hands that broke beneath it. She does not sleep yet. Instead, she writes, "The light has spread. May it warm." A bell rings again, softer this time. Outside, fireworks bloom across the night like wild chrysanthemums. Children laugh. A soldier lifts his daughter to see. Somewhere in a distant colony, a torch still burns, seen by no crowd, witnessed by only sky. And in Windsor, a queen watches her own shadow on the wall. The flame flickers, but it does not go out. That morning, the room trembles, not from thunder or footsteps, but from a sound thinner than paper, faster than thought. Click, tap, click, click, tap. The telegraph chirps into life like a bird awakening in winter. You move toward the table, where a slip of paper curls from the machine, its edge torn, its surface lined with dashes and dots. Not words, not yet, but meaning, movement, time distilled into pulses. Victoria receives the telegram before breakfast. It arrives from India, from a governor whose name she has never spoken aloud. The message, decoded and transcribed by the footman's careful hand, lies quietly on her tray. 12 words, 14 seconds of travel, 4,000 miles of empire, crossed without wind or sail. She sets down her tea and reads. You almost forget this isn't a memory. For decades, messages took weeks, then days. Now, moments. Time itself bends, and Victoria, who once waited breathless for replies from Europe, now receives them mid-thought. Her face does not change, but her eyes do. She writes her reply by hand, a simple greeting, a thank you. A note of acknowledgement to the village he mentioned, recently flooded, recently rebuilt. She signs it, seals it, watches the telegram clerk carry it to the operator. An hour later, it is read aloud to a boy in Punjab who does not know where Windsor is, only that the Queen has spoken his name. A recurring symbol returns. The wire, thin as hair, coiled and looped through oceans, strung between trees, bored beneath streets. It connects not just places, but rhythms. It turns silence into dialogue, distance into echo. And it reminds her of something Albert once said, "We will live to see thought outrun the sun." He was right. The silence still hums. Messages arrive from Canada, from Egypt, from Johannesburg, where a young lawyer named Gandhi observes the Queen's empire with growing concern. From Hong Kong, where a teacher thanks her for the new school. From Ireland, where famine once reigned and memory still burns. The words vary, praise, protest, poetry, but all arrive like whispers caught in wire. Victoria reads them each evening, before the lamps are lowered. Sometimes she smiles. Sometimes she closes her eyes and wonders what it would have been like to know Albert by telegram. Would their courtship have been quicker? Would he have died farther from her, and faster? She does not linger there. A message arrives from Balmoral. One of her granddaughters has written her first letter. She replies via telegram, adding only one word, proud. It travels through towers, beneath rivers, across miles of mud and moss, until it lights up a small parlor where a child squeals and clutches the paper like a royal decree. Ash drifts in the quiet. Yet not all messages are kind. Reports come quicker now, of rebellion, of strikes, of dissent brewing in corners too long ignored, of deaths, of rising tensions in South Africa, of the push and pull between empire's pride and the peoples it has pressed beneath its weight. Victoria receives them all, steady as stone. She does not panic, but she does not dismiss. She writes to her ministers, "Speed must not outrun care." And to her daughter, "It is not enough to know faster. We must understand deeper." The machines tick into night, their chatter a lullaby of progress and unease. Later she walks her garden, the roses dew-heavy, the stars dim behind cloud. She places a hand on the old oak Albert once planted and whispers a thought he'll never hear. We built something vast. But can we hold it? The wind answers only with rustling leaves. The wires overhead remain silent, but waiting. That dawn, the light over Windsor comes not soft, but silver, clear, cold, and regal. You step into the Queen's private chamber as she finishes dressing, her veil pinned precisely, her brooch glinting just beneath the chin. But it is not a crown she wears this morning. It is something older, heavier, stranger. A new title now sits beside her name, etched on papers, embroidered into ceremony. Empress of India. The room does not feel larger, but the mirror does. She stands before it, as she has done 1,000 times before, yet today her reflection looks back with a new weight. She sees not only herself, but something behind her, an empire drawn tighter, more intricate, more fragile. The mirror shows her as the world now names her. Empress. Of lands she has never touched. Of tongues she does not speak. Of peoples who did not ask to be ruled. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Disraeli had crafted the title, wrapped it in flattery and ceremony. It pleased the Queen then to feel herself set upon a pedestal high enough to rival any Roman matron or Byzantine sovereign, a title not of Britain, but of the world. She had accepted it. But now, before the mirror, she begins to question what exactly she has become. The symbol returns. The mirror, not as ornament, but as witness. It shows not the past, not the present, but a reflection turned sideways. It splits the Queen from the woman, the title from the self. The silence still hums. Victoria steps away from the mirror. Her footfalls are quiet on the carpet, yet each one echoes across continents. Behind her, India, a land of millions, a land of jewels, hunger, music, dust. She's seen its images in tapestries and lantern slides, heard its name sung by soldiers and whispered by traders. She's held silks in her hand, worn its diamonds against her throat, and yet it remains just out of reach. Her courtiers speak of loyalty, of pageantry. Her ministers speak of railway lines laid, of laws passed, of temples respected. But her letters, those from missionaries, from Indian princes, from native English speakers trained in empire's schools, paint a fuller picture. She reads of drought, of protest, of prayers answered with silence. And still, she writes. She writes to a young Maharaja whose English lessons include her speeches. She writes to a British widow who lost her husband in the Delhi Rebellion. She writes to a Muslim teacher in Calcutta who asked for books and whom she sends more than requested. A bell rings again, softer this time. But the mirror lingers. It watches her even when she turns away. It knows the contradictions in her heart, that she loves India without understanding it, that she claims it without knowing how to hold it gently, that she signs orders that ripple like monsoons across oceans she has never sailed. She walks the gardens that evening, past roses blooming too late in the season. The gardeners nod. The dusk presses in. Somewhere in the distance, a cricket chirps, and again her thoughts turn inward. She touches the brooch on her gown. A gift, Indian craftsmanship, delicate as breath. Yet within it, she feels the weight of the subcontinent. She closes her eyes and sees the procession that crowned her empress, the horses, the drums, the torches reflected in palace glass. And she asks, not aloud, "Do they know me? Or do they know only my shadow?" The breeze shifts. You're still there. That night, she returns to the mirror once more. No veil, no jewels, only herself. She looks long, deeper than vanity allows, and then she whispers something only the mirror hears. "I rule you, and still, I cannot reach you." The mirror says nothing, but in the stillness, it does not lie. That morning, the mist hangs over the Irish Sea like sorrow made visible. You walk the edge of the land, where waves touch stone with restless hands, and the wind carries the faintest echo of a hymn sung too quietly to save. The fields roll inward, green as ever, but thin, like hunger disguised in velvet. The Queen does not stand here, not yet, but her name travels these hills like weather, sometimes feared, sometimes forgotten. Ireland, not colony, not quite kin, and never quite healed. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Victoria sits at Windsor, a letter unopened in her lap. It arrived with the morning dispatch, addressed in the delicate hand of a Dublin rector. It speaks of another protest, a gathering near Clonmel, not violent, but loud. They carry signs: justice, home rule, memory. The names of the dead are stitched into their banners, not soldiers, but children lost to famine. She remembers the famine, not only from reports and relief campaigns, but from her own journals, entries marked by urgency, confusion, grief at a distance. Over 1 million gone. More still fled. She had sent funds. She had written words, but words did not fill bellies. Funds did not mend graves. A recurring symbol returns. The shadow. It falls across her writing desk now. It touches every mention of Ireland in her red box. Not long, not thick, but unmistakable. Even her own pen hesitates. The silence still hums. Victoria had visited Ireland before. Once, twice. Each time the crowds were polite, the carriages adorned, the air sweet with scripted cheers. But she remembers the looks, the ones that watched from the windows, the ones that didn't wave. The silence not of reverence, but of memory. She writes now not to Parliament, but to her daughter in Germany. "I do not know how to love a land that mourns my crown." The reply does not come, and so she reads instead. Irish poets, Irish papers, Irish voices written in English that do not hide their wounds. She underlines phrases: soil turned over graves, rain without end, landlords who never learn our names. She does not stop reading. In her garden, the roses are blooming, but she does not pick them. She thinks instead of fields left fallow, of crops rotting beneath wet skies, of boats bound for America with hands clutching relics from crumbled parishes. Ash drifts in the quiet. One evening, she receives a painting, unsigned, delivered anonymously. It shows a young woman standing barefoot in a ruined cottage, her eyes defiant despite the ash in her hair. Behind her, through the window, a British flag flutters in storm. Victoria studies it a long time. She keeps it, not to display, but to remember. Her ministers speak often now of the Irish question, of laws to tighten, of borders to define, of voices to mute. She listens, but no longer trusts entirely. The shadow has grown too sharp. She begins to write more carefully, avoiding rhetoric, returning to names, places, stories. She thinks of Albert, who once said, "We must listen not to the voice of approval, but to the quiet of pain." She walks the hallways late that night, past portraits of monarchs who ruled by steel. She places her hand on the cold stone beneath one frame and whispers, "They do not want to be ruled." She does not say it with scorn, only recognition. The next morning, a new report arrives. Another protest. Another priest imprisoned. Another field gone to seed. She sighs. A bell rings again, softer this time. In her journal, she writes no opinion, only a question. How long can love be asked without being returned? And outside, the Irish rain begins again. That morning, the great halls of Buckingham glisten beneath layers of polish, columns standing like frozen sentries, marble floors gleaming white and cold, tapestries unmoving in the draftless air. You walk slowly between them, where silence is thicker than usual, where dust dares not linger. The Queen will descend the staircase soon. A foreign delegation waits. The chandeliers have been lit. But beneath the stillness, something stirs. Not the building, the age. A tide has begun to shift. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Victoria glides through the corridor with practiced grace. Black velvet, silver buttons, the weight of tradition in each step. She nods to the attendants, accepts the whispered update from her chamberlain. The French ambassador has arrived early. There are murmurs of unrest in Russia. A debate in parliament about reform again, always again. She nods, says little. But within, the water rises. The empire stands tall. That's what the ministers say. A tower of marble carved from centuries of conquest and contract. But Victoria knows towers, and she knows tides. She hears the muffled sounds beyond these walls, the murmurs of workers, the questions of students, the voices of women who ask not for favor but for footing. The symbol returns, the marble. It holds her now, encases her. It preserves legacy, yes, but it also mutes breath. The statues in the palace are perfect and cold. She touches one, a likeness of Albert, polished smooth, eyes fixed on something far away. She loves it, but she does not speak to it. The silence still hums. A letter arrives from a barrister in Birmingham. It is polite, firm. It asks why certain schools remain unfunded, why certain boroughs have no representation. It is not angry, it is not bitter, but it does not bow. She reads it twice. In another age, she might have had it dismissed. Now, she answers it. The Queen, aged, veiled, eternal, still feels the water beneath the stone, still senses the shifting of the people. They do not wish to erase the crown, but they wish to stand beneath it without kneeling. She begins to adjust. She reduces ceremonial appearances, not out of fatigue, but to make room. She asks to meet with those outside court, editors, union leaders, a librarian from Manchester who speaks so softly she must lean forward to hear her. But she listens. A bell rings again, softer this time. She thinks of the marble halls of empire, the palaces of Delhi, the courts of Cape Town, the rail station arches of Sydney. Beautiful, enduring, but each raised upon earth that shifts beneath unseen feet. She dreams one night of the palace filled not with portraits and gold frames, but with mirrors, every wall reflecting not herself, but her subjects, teachers, seamstresses, farmers, daughters, sons, the ones never painted. She wakes before dawn and watches the Thames roll by. The breeze shifts. You're still there. That day, she walks without attendants, through the south wing, past the gallery, down the marble steps, her cane tapping lightly like a metronome over water. She stops before a statue of Britannia, shield and trident poised with triumph, and beside it, she imagines something smaller, a child with bare feet, hand outstretched, not to worship, but to ask. She writes that evening in her journal. Stone remembers, but water shapes. Outside, rain begins to fall, not with violence, but with rhythm. And beneath the marble, the tide continues to rise. That afternoon, the city breathes through its chimneys and presses against the library windows. You step inside, where the dust has settled into the margins of well-loved books, and the air tastes faintly of ink and coal smoke. A printing press thumps rhythmically in the street below. On the table before you lies a folded piece of paper, not royal parchment, not wax-sealed decree, just cheap newsprint. Its headline reads, "Votes for Women?" Victoria has not yet opened it. But she will. You almost forget this isn't a memory. She sits at her desk in Osborne House, a letter clutched between her fingers. It is from a woman she does not know. It begins plainly. "Your Majesty, I write not in anger, but in belief." The Queen reads slowly. The woman speaks of daughters, of factory work, of taxes paid without voice, of parliament that governs without asking. She finishes the letter, then folds it, and places it beside the others. There are many now, voices rising, not in shouting, but in lace, not in rebellion, but in careful, steel-edged thought. The suffragists wear gloves, but their words are blades. They do not ask to be queens, they ask to be counted. Victoria, at first, is torn. She was never denied a crown because she was a woman. She was set upon it by fate. And yet, she knows what it is to be doubted, patronized, belittled in salons of polished men. She knows what it is to rule while being told she cannot decide. A recurring symbol returns: the ink. It stains not just her fingers, but the fabric of the world. It flows from the pens of women who have never worn tiaras, but have carried nations in their arms. From teachers, from typesetters, from nurses writing by candlelight. She reads their pamphlets, she sees their banners, she studies their arguments, and slowly her thoughts begin to shift, not with shouts, but with silence. The silence still hums. In her diary she writes, "There is power in persistence." One afternoon, she visits a school. It is small, funded by donations. The girls stand straighter than expected. One asks if the Queen ever doubted herself. She pauses, then says, "Doubt is not a sign of weakness, only of thought." Later, she reads of marches in Hyde Park, thousands of women in white, carrying placards, accompanied by daughters who are not afraid. The papers ask what she thinks. She does not answer. But in her next letter to Parliament, she adds a line about education, about access, about fairness. She is not an activist. She is something slower. A stone moved by ink. A bell rings again, softer this time. The press below continues. New pamphlets each day, some gentle, some angry, some pleading. Victoria walks her garden that evening, a scrap of lace in her hand, part of a gift from a suffrage group who sent no petition, only the embroidered phrase, "For those who listen." She keeps it, not for memory, for meaning. The empire stands still, but its women move, and she, ever the lion in velvet, does not roar. She listens, and the ink continues to flow. That evening, the sky over Surrey bruises purple, streaked with clouds that drift like forgotten prayers. You enter a building whose windows face inward, not out. The walls are thick, padded not for silence but to keep the world away. Inside, the air smells of old linens, chalk, and something colder: restraint. It is not cruelty that hangs here, but containment. You walk slowly through the corridor of the asylum, past locked doors, past names never spoken outside these walls, behind one, humming, behind another, weeping. Victoria has never walked these halls, not in person, but she hears them now. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The Queen reads a report on mental institutions, sent by a reformer who insists it is not the chains that wound, but the forgetting. Women committed for grief, for defiance, for silence. A girl of 16, too sad to work. A mother who talked too much to herself. A seamstress who saw visions. They are not criminals. They are simply inconvenient. She closes the report slowly. Her hands tremble only slightly. In her own court, there are whispers. Noble families hiding daughters from society. Sons sent abroad for rest. Madness is not spoken of. It is dressed in euphemism. Delicate. Strained. Unwell. But Victoria remembers her own descent, the years after Albert, the silence, the closed curtains, the inability to lift herself from mourning. Had she not been queen, might she have been locked away? She does not ask aloud, but she wonders. A recurring symbol returns, the angel. She sees it in a letter from a nurse, an attendant, she calls herself, who writes of patients not with judgment, but gentleness. They need not pity, only place. She describes one woman who paints butterflies across the floor each day in chalk, another who sings lullabies to no one. The queen reads the letter 3 times, then sends a response, a grant, anonymous. The silence still hums. She commissions a review of asylum conditions, not widely, quietly, through channels that do not name her. She reads each report at her desk late into the night, the candlelight bending over words like isolation, hysteria, purgation, and sometimes prayer. She finds little comfort in either. One story stays with her. A woman who believed she was a bird, who flapped her arms day after day until they bound them. Victoria dreams of her, sees her perched on a tower of Windsor, feathers made of pages from books never read. She does not fall. She watches. In her journal, Victoria writes, "Not all queens wear crowns. Some wear silence." A bell rings again, softer this time. She walks the halls of Osborne, past her own portraits, past rooms once filled with children. The air is still, but her mind does not rest. She thinks of the women whose names she's read, whose voices flicker between the pages. She begins a new letter, to a medical board. She asks for gentleness to become law. She does not ask to be praised, only heard. Later that week, a box arrives. From the nurse. Inside, a folded drawing, done in pencil. It shows a birdcage, open. Beneath it, the words, "She no longer sings, but she watches." Victoria places it beside Albert's portrait. Ash drifts in the quiet. The asylum still stands, but its locks grow looser, its halls warmer. And in a room where a girl once painted butterflies, a window is opened. Just enough for wind, just enough for light. That night, the harbor holds its breath. The wind pulls gently at the sails of a departing ship, and lanterns bob on masts like stars lost just above the sea. You walk along the dockside with the scent of salt, coal, and old rope wrapping around your coat. A whistle cries once, long, low, and feet shuffle on wooden planks. Mothers lift children. Men stare forward. Girls clutch folded letters and cloth satchels. The ship will not wait, and neither will time. They are not explorers. They are leavers, emigrants. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Victoria does not watch them from her window, but she reads their numbers every week. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, America, still and always. Her people, her subjects, are leaving, not in exile, but in hope, in desperation, in restlessness, in search of more. They carry her face on coins, her name on papers, her laws in their pockets. But they carry far more within them, dreams that do not ask permission, only passage. The symbol returns, the lantern, not as decoration, but as guide, lit to send them off, to promise safe crossing, to guard against the dark water, but also to mark what they leave behind and what may not return. The breeze shifts. You're still there. In her study, Victoria opens a letter from a woman in Ontario. It is written in careful English, her second language. She thanks the Queen for recognizing her marriage. "My child was born a British citizen," she writes, "but in a land where I still learn the snow." Victoria smiles faintly, places the letter in a small box labeled Commonwealth Voices. It is not official, but it is hers. Other letters follow. A girl writes from Adelaide about the heat. A soldier's widow from Cape Town thanks her for a pension. A Maori chief's descendant pens a note of concern about land, his words translated but his meaning clear. We remain, even as the map changes. She reads each one. She thinks of the oceans, not as borders, but as corridors, and how many now walk them. A bell rings again, softer this time. In Parliament they speak of immigration and dominion with terms like strategy, like economy. But Victoria, ever distant, feels something else, the ache of dispersal. Not loss, not pride, something in between. She remembers her own children, sent to Germany, Russia, the four winds of Europe, the feeling of goodbye wearing pearls and lace. She knows the faces of those who stay. She imagines the silhouettes of those who go. Later that evening, she walks through her drawing room. The globe on the pedestal spins lazily beneath her fingers. Her eye follows a line across the Atlantic, down the coast of Africa, back around to Singapore. Her finger pauses over a port named after her, Victoria Harbor. She does not feel honored. She feels responsible. Ash drifts in the quiet. She writes in her diary, "They carry lanterns we cannot see. May they find where they belong." That night, she dreams of a ship lit only by lanterns, not from above, but from the hands of those aboard. Each passenger holds one, some high, some low, some flickering, some strong. They do not sing, but their silence speaks. The Queen stands on a distant dock, unseen, watching. And as the ship fades into fog, a single lantern remains, floating, waiting, until it is lifted again. By someone new. That dusk, the sky above Windsor fades not into darkness, but into violet. A color neither ending nor beginning, just the long, slow hush of a day reluctant to release its crown. You walk beneath archways lit by lanterns, past courtiers speaking more softly now, past portraits that have grown dustier around the edges. The palace has not changed, but the pace inside it has. Even the walls seem to exhale. Victoria holds the scepter today, but only lightly. You almost forget this isn't a memory. She sits in her favorite chair by the long window, her back straight, hands composed. The scepter lies across her lap, not as symbol, but as story. Once, it thrilled her with its weight. Now, it feels less like power and more like inheritance. Something past, not wielded. Something to be understood, not only displayed. The courtiers bring her papers to sign, briefings to note, telegrams to read. She reviews them all, but slower. Her eyes take longer to move from word to word. Her wrist aches after a single signature. Still, she signs. Because she must. Because she still reigns. A recurring symbol returns. The twilight. It casts long shadows across her desk, filling the room with gold where once there was marble. In this light, nothing looks sharp. Edges blur. Time softens. And yet, some truths shine clearer than ever. Victoria knows she is nearing the end. She is not afraid. But she is watchful. She writes more now. Notes to her children, instructions for the court, letters to those who may never receive them. She addresses envelopes to distant cousins, to aging soldiers, to school teachers she read about in the paper. She includes lines of poetry, bits of scripture, fragments of thought. She writes not to rule, but to leave behind warmth. The silence still hums. In Parliament, her ministers speak with reverence when her name is mentioned. Even those who once opposed her rise to their feet when her letters are read aloud. She does not watch, but she hears, and she knows what it means to outlast. Her diary entries grow shorter, but sharper. "They do not need to love me," she writes one night, "only to remember I tried." At dusk, she walks the garden paths with a cane now. A maid follows discreetly. She pauses at every rose, every bench. She speaks aloud to no one in particular, sometimes to Albert, sometimes to the wind. She pauses at the sundial and touches its cool brass edge. Even shadow needs light to form. A bell rings again, softer this time. The empire hums on without pause. New governments form. The telegraph wires tangle further across the globe. Trains depart by the minute. And yet, in this moment, twilight settles fully upon her. The scepter lies still in her lap. She looks to it not as symbol of might, but as a question. What remains when rule ends? Her answer comes in the light, in the letters she sent, in the children who carry echoes of her voice, in the eyes of a nurse who smiles at her with neither fear nor formality. Ash drifts in the quiet. That night, the scepter is placed on its stand. The room is dimmed. The queen leans back in her chair, her fingers folded gently across her lap. She does not speak. She only watches the light fade, not with regret, but with readiness. That morning, the doors to the map room creak open with the sigh of disuse. You step inside, and the air tastes of chalk and linen and something older. Dust. Not the kind that settles overnight, but the kind that gathers slowly, over years, as ambition turns to memory. The globes here no longer spin. The scrolls remain rolled. Sunlight falls in golden slats through the tall windows, revealing motes dancing where names were once declared aloud. Victoria stands at the center, not as conqueror, as witness. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The room was once filled with voices, strategists, envoys, ministers tracing railways across parchment, drawing crimson lines around lands they'd never seen. Now the room is quiet, its maps unfurled like shrouds, their edges curled with age. The empire, so wide, so meticulously marked, India, Canada, Australia, Africa, remains intact on paper. But in her eyes, Victoria sees more than borders. She sees cost. A recurring symbol returns. The dust. It lies on every surface. And it does not lie. It reveals what time forgets. Dust does not discriminate. It falls on victories and wounds alike. And here, in this quiet chamber, the dust has gathered over every promise ever written in ink. She brushes her hand along the table. Underneath, Nigeria, Sudan, Burma. Names she knows. Names she's signed into the empire's memory. Names she's spoken aloud in meetings, in dispatches, in dreams. Some were celebrated, others grieved. She sits, not from fatigue, from reverence. The silence still hums. She picks up a map, creased, with oceans faded blue-gray. It's a copy of Africa, the lines drawn sharper than the rivers they ignore. She holds it lightly, the way one holds a photograph of someone once misunderstood. Later that day, a minister arrives to brief her. He speaks of troop movements, of gold discovered in a territory near the Transvaal. He mentions a skirmish in the Cape. Victoria listens, then quietly asks, "Do they know why we came?" The minister hesitates. So does history. That evening she walks the map room again, this time alone. Her cane taps softly as she moves past shelves of ledgers and atlases. She does not open them. She has memorized their contours. She stops before a wall-length map of the world. The empire is in red. It blooms across continents like blood dried into velvet. But her eyes do not settle there. They drift to the places unmarked. The sea, the gaps, the islands unnamed by London. A bell rings again, softer this time. She thinks of her subjects not as numbers or flags, but as people. The boy who carved a boat from driftwood in Jamaica, the nurse who wrote her from Calcutta, the schoolteacher in Nova Scotia, whose letter included a pressed violet. She sees their faces now, scattered across the map like lanterns. And then she closes her eyes. She remembers Albert's words once written to her after a long session of reviewing colonial reports. Maps must not only show what we rule, They must teach us where we are blind. She had not understood then. Now, she does. Ash drifts in the quiet. In her diary, she writes that night, "This room once told me where we stood in the world. Now it shows me how far we've drifted." She asks for no one to clean it. Let the dust stay. Let it say what she no longer needs to. The empire still hums, but in the map room, something gentler speaks. The silence of knowing. The pause before goodbye. That winter afternoon, the frost etches delicate veins across the palace windows, like time itself sketching over the glass. Inside, the drawing room hums with foreign syllables and silver laughter. You follow the sound through the hallway, past portraits whose eyes do not blink, into a chamber where children, no longer small, no longer truly children, sit poised, polite, and royal. They speak in German, English, Russian, French, blended accents, braided futures. They are Victoria's legacy, written not on scrolls, but in blood and bone. Her grandchildren. And not just hers. Europe's. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Victoria sits by the fire, a shawl wrapped carefully across her shoulders, her eyes flitting from face to face. Wilhelm, Kaiser in waiting, stands too straight. He smiles, but it is performance. Behind him, his mother, Victoria's own daughter, watches with the quiet intensity of someone who knows how kingdoms slip. Next to him sits Alexandra, the darling girl who would one day be Tsarina of Russia. Her hands tremble when she pours the tea. Across from her, George, future king of Britain, fidgeting with his cuff, his face already lined with inherited gravity. Victoria sees it all, not with pride, with weight. The symbol returns. The thread, invisible but taut, strung between all of them. A web of marriage, duty, resentment, hope. They call her grandmama. They kneel, they laugh, but they also calculate. These are not simply visits. These are rehearsals for thrones, for treaties, for future wars written in childhood jokes and glances. The silence still hums. She listens to Wilhelm speak of naval strength, of German unification. His hand rests too heavily on his saber even as he sits. Alexandra asks about Windsor's chapel, her voice soft, her eyes always a little elsewhere, as if watching the shadow of history from the corner of the room. Victoria responds with stories, with memory, with nothing too sharp. But inside she wonders, what have I built? She thinks of Albert, his dream of Europe united not by war, but by family, marriage as diplomacy, blood as alliance. They had played the chessboard together, placing sons and daughters like knights and queens. But pawns change, and the board is now unsteady. A bell rings again, softer this time. That night, she walks the hallway of ancestral portraits. The candle in her hand throws flickers onto faces that no longer remember her name. She stops before one painting, her own, younger, before widowhood, before wars. She does not linger. She passes another door, hears soft music, laughter. They dance now, the grandchildren, beneath the chandeliers. They twirl and smile and dream of crowns. And she sees it. Not their crowns, their collisions. Not their rule, their ruin. Ash drifts in the quiet. In her diary she writes, "I have sewn the world together with names, but will they tear where the thread was too fine?" She closes the book slowly. She does not answer the knock at her door. She only listens to the laughter fading, one thread at a time. That morning, the light in the royal studio is not golden but pearled, muted, cold, like breath held too long. The air holds stillness thick as wool, and you step into a room where every footfall echoes across floorboards that remember centuries of posing, sitting, standing still. Easels lean silently in corners. Brushes sleep in jars of cloudy turpentine. A single chair sits in the center, carved from oak, the velvet seat worn by countless crowns, and in it, Victoria sits, for the last portrait. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The painter, young but careful, adjusts the cloth draped behind her. He does not ask her to smile. He does not need to. She is not the girl queen of earlier paintings, nor the cloaked widow of mid-reign. She is something else now. Bone beneath brocade, iron softened by time, a figure carved not by vanity, but by years. She does not look at the artist. She looks past him, out the window, to a tree she once planted, to a place where a dog once waited. The symbol returns, the frame, wood, gold-leafed, empty for now, waiting. It is not simply meant to preserve. It is meant to declare, this mattered. It is not alive, but it becomes witness. The breeze shifts. You're still there. Victoria sits motionless, but within her mind, images drift like pages unmoored. She sees her first coronation robe, too large for her shoulders, the clasp of Albert's hand before a state ball, the damp earth at Balmoral, the letters she never finished, the scream of a child born in silence, the burst of applause from a people she never fully knew how to love, yet ruled all the same. She thinks of her body, not as symbol, but as vessel, what it carried, what it endured. The artist begins to paint. He does not ask questions. He does not need stories. He needs shape, light, shadow, and in those, she offers everything. A bell rings again, softer this time. Later, her lady-in-waiting adjusts the hem of her gown. Her nurse brings her tea. The painter thanks her, bows, leaves. The room empties. But she does not rise. She looks to the canvas, unfinished, faceless still, and whispers, "Make it true. Not perfect. Just true." She rests her hands on her lap, folded like prayer. She listens to the wind outside, soft against the glass. She lets the silence surround her, not as void, but as presence. Ash drifts in the quiet. The portrait, when completed, will hang beside others, queens of past, kings forgotten, consorts and crusaders. But this one will be different, not because of the crown, because of the eyes. They do not challenge. They do not plead. They simply remain, like the last line of a story that does not end in triumph, but in truth. That morning begins with stillness, real stillness, the kind that hangs before knowing, before clocks strike, before the staff begins to whisper in corridors. You walk the halls of Osborne House, where the drapes remain drawn and the hearth is cold. The smell of lavender from the pressed linens lingers, soft as breath. No footsteps echo, no voices rise, just the heavy hush of a place waiting to understand what has just passed. The bell hasn't rung yet, but it will. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Victoria lies in her chamber, the bed not grand, but solid. Her eyes closed, her hands folded just above the blanket's edge. The candle at her bedside has burned to a stub, its wax forming quiet stalactites. Her face is neither pained nor peaceful. It simply is. The lines speak of years no history book can hold. A nurse touches her wrist. Another leans close. And in that small space between two breaths, a reign ends. 63 years and 7 months. The longest yet. A recurring symbol returns. The bell. It hangs in the small chapel by the garden, its rope untouched since the last wedding. Or was it the christening of a great-grandchild? Today, it will toll not for birth or union, but for the closing of a crown. Not a clamor. A single, deliberate chime. The chamberlain steps into the courtyard. He lowers the flag. The silence still hums. In the kitchen, the cook removes her apron and cries quietly by the flour sack. In the stables, a groom strokes the horse Victoria once rode beside Albert. At Balmoral, The staff will be told in hours. In London, black cloth is already being drawn from attics and trunks. But here, at Osborne, no proclamation has yet been read. There is just the breath of sea air through the hedgerows, the soft tapping of a clock refusing to tick louder, the weight of time bowing over the house like a veil. The family begins to gather. Her children arrive first, now gray, bent, older than she was when they were born. They kneel, not as royalty, as kin. George stands near the door. Wilhelm hesitates, then enters. The nurse, still nearby, holds a small velvet pouch, spectacles, handkerchief, the ring Albert once gave her. A bell rings again, softer this time, and then the rope is pulled. Once, and the sound spills like water through the grounds. It rolls over hedges, through windows, into kitchens and salons and across the wide lawn. It moves like recognition, like reverence, like release. Ash drifts in the quiet. In the study, her diary remains open. The last entry. Stillness brings no fear, only return. And in the wind that moves through the open window, her veil stirs once, then settles. That morning, London holds its breath. The chimneys do not puff as high. The shopkeepers open later. Even the crows on the rooftops seem to hush. A drape is drawn. A bell tolls, once, then again, and again. Along every street, black fabric sways like mourning caught in wind. You move through the city not as visitor, but as witness, and what you see is not panic, not grief's wail, but something quieter. Respect. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The Queen is gone. The news arrived not in trumpet, but in ink. The word traveled overnight by telegraph, reaching newsrooms, pulpits, postmen, palace gates. Queen Victoria is dead. The phrase appears in every tongue, on every page. Children are told to speak softly. Workmen remove their caps. Old women press handkerchiefs to their lips and do not weep, but close their eyes. In Parliament, the benches are fuller than usual, but no voices rise. Even those who once opposed her now bow their heads. The carriages are slower on this day. Horses wear black plumes. The wheels turn through fog without protest. Across the river, at Southwark, dock workers pause for 5 minutes. No whistle is blown. In Whitechapel, boys who once heckled crown processions now stand in still rows. In Kensington, an old man who remembers her coronation in '37 removes his hat and simply stands. The symbol returns. The black veil. No longer just hers. It cloaks the city now, not as costume, but as atmosphere. It softens brick. It quiets bells. It draws a curtain across time, inviting reflection. A bell rings again, softer this time. At Westminster, the preparation begins, not for governance, but for goodbye. She will lie in state, but not yet. Today is for gathering. Drapes pulled across arches, guards stationed not in ceremony, but in silence. The clock at St. Paul's tolls 10 times. At each chime, the pigeons lift, then settle again. A nation breathes through ritual, and in homes across the city, candles are lit. Some for mourning, some for memory, some because it feels like the right thing to do. In a boarding house near Paddington, a widow pins a sketch of Victoria to the wall beside her children's beds. She tells them, "She was ours." In a tailor's shop on Fleet Street, black crepe is folded with reverence, orders coming faster than the scissors can cut. In a school in Lambeth, a girl writes a poem on a slate, the last line smudged by her own thumb. And now the crown is quiet. The silence still hums. The Queen's body has not yet returned to London, but already the city changes. The taverns close early. The theaters dim their lights. The police stations place a wreath. Even the fog moves slower. Victoria's name is whispered now like scripture, not of holiness, but of habit, of having always been there, like stone, like sky, like breath. And now, for the first time in most lives, she is not. A carriage rolls past you, empty, its windows darkened, no flag, no symbol, but everyone knows. Ash drifts in the quiet. In the Royal Archives, a clerk pens a final notation in the Great Register. Her Majesty Queen Victoria, deceased January 22nd, 1901. He places down the pen, exhales, and folds the book closed. That morning, the sky hangs low above London, not dark, but colorless, washed in the hue of spent parchment. You stand among the crowd along the long black-draped avenue, boots rooted to stone, breath clouding before you like memory exhaled. The procession has not begun, but already the hush has settled. Thousands in velvet silence, bound by shared witness. Children sit on shoulders, men remove their hats. Even the wind forgets to speak. Then a single drumbeat, and the Queen begins her final journey. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Victoria's coffin is borne not on a gilded chariot of old monarchs, but on a gun carriage, an honor reserved not for queens, but for generals. She would have wanted it that way. And at her command, she wears white, not mourning black. Her veil is gone. Her body lies wrapped in silk and memory, in a coffin of oak and lead, with the ring Albert once wore placed upon her finger once more. The procession moves slowly, measured, across roads once paved for her coronation carriage, past buildings that rose during her reign, past people who have never known another sovereign. The symbol returns, the procession, not simply of mourners, but of history, of time made visible, of an empire walking behind its queen one last time. Soldiers from Canada, diplomats from India, nobles from Australia, all in step, all beneath the same sky. The silence is heavier now. At the head of the line, her son, now King Edward VII, rides upright, his eyes swollen, not with tears, but with effort. Behind him, Wilhelm of Germany, George of Britain, Russian dukes, Belgian princes, a crown of nations moving in quiet orbit around the woman who bound them. The wheels of the carriage creak like old iron. The horses snort clouds into the winter air, and along the entire route, no one speaks, not even the children. In Whitehall, the bells toll 12. At every strike, pigeons lift. In Hyde Park, a child drops a rose through the railings. It lands without sound. The Queen passes, and the crowd bows, not with formality, but instinct. A bell rings again, softer this time. And then, slowly, reverently, the voices rise. Not loud, not in song, but in murmur. A hymn from 1,000 lips, some in tune, some only whispering the words. Abide with me. The verses drift upward like incense, like fog, like farewell. The coffin does not pause, but the wind seems to. In a window above Pall Mall, a nurse holds the hand of an old woman who served in the palace when Victoria was crowned. She is going home, the nurse says. The old woman only nods. Ash drifts in the quiet. At the gates of Windsor, the procession pauses. The doors open. The Queen enters the place she chose for ending. Later, they will lower her into the tomb beside Albert. They will close the stone. They will say the words. The page will turn. But here, on this road, in this light, she still moves forward, wrapped not just in linen, but in time. That twilight, the stone vault waits open beneath Windsor's chapel, breathless and cold, with torches casting long shadows on limestone walls. You walk through the hush of the crypt, where the ceiling bows like a reverent head, and the air tastes of marble dust and age-old lilies. The steps down are smooth, worn thin by time and sorrow. This is no throne room, no court, just stillness, just sleep. The crown sits nearby, unworn, waiting. You almost forget this isn't a memory. Victoria lies beside him now. Albert. At last. The vault is not lavish, but solemn. No music here, no speeches. Just the scrape of boots as bearers step back. Just the soft thud of the final rose placed upon her casket by a trembling gloved hand. Her name is etched not in gold, but in stone. Her years, long. Her reign, longer still. Her silence now, complete. She asked to be buried with his robe, with his letters, with his handkerchief in her palm. And they have obeyed. The symbol returns, the crown, but not atop her head, not in triumph. It sits upon a velvet cushion, untouched, beside the altar, heavy with inheritance, brimming not with power, but with memory, and with grief. The Archbishop does not lift it, not yet. It waits. The silence still hums. Above ground, the chapel is filled with faces. Dukes, generals, attendants who dressed her as a young queen now older than she ever was. The choir stands ready, but does not yet sing. The doors remain ajar, as if still hoping for her return. But she will not return, and so the crown remains still. Crown. A child watches from the gallery, fingers clutched around the carved pew rail. She does not understand everything, but she knows something sacred has happened, that something has closed, that something has been set down. And in that pause, the torchlight flickers, and her breath slows. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. Edward, her son, kneels. He will rise as king. But for this moment, he is only a son, aged and bowed. His shoulders do not straighten. He does not rush to the crown. He looks instead to the stone, to the mother who once carried him. And then he says nothing, only places his hand upon the coffin, and stays there, for a long while. In the royal apartments, her writing desk remains untouched, the diary open to the final page, the veil draped across the chair, the inkwell sealed. A pressed violet lies between two books, its color faded, its scent long gone, but it remains, as she does. Ash drifts in the quiet. They will close the tomb. They will carry the crown upward. They will begin again. But for now, it rests. Not claimed, not abandoned, simply set down. That evening, long after the bells have faded and the courtiers have retreated, a breeze stirs through the long gallery at Osborne House. You wander the hall in near darkness, past glass cases of relics and faded sketches of empire. The house creaks like an old ship tethered at harbor, wood and stone stretched by memory. Moonlight traces soft patterns on the floor, and the silence feels fuller now, occupied, not empty. Something remains. Something lingers. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The queen is gone, but her breath still lives in these rooms. Her thoughts still line the margins of old letters tucked into drawer corners. Her footsteps still echo faintly on the stairs. Her hand still hovers just above the velvet of her writing chair. Victoria, who ruled an empire yet always sought its heart, left behind not just dominion, but a question. What have we become? The symbol returns, the dream, not a fantasy, not illusion, but the dream of a world held together by threads, fragile, stitched from hope and contradiction. Victoria dreamed not as a poet dreams, but as a builder does, in structure, in names, in treaties. She believed in order, in duty, in the shape of things to come. And yet, she also dreamed in private, of children unbowed, of letters written in kindness, of a world where legacy did not mean burden, The breeze shifts. You're still there. The inheritance she leaves behind is not just the throne. It is not only the torch passed to Edward, or the titles divided among children who now sit upon other continents. It is something gentler, stranger, harder to name. It is a language of perseverance. It is a rhythm of silence. It is the belief that to reign is not to possess, but to remain. And even in death, she remains. In Canada, a girl copies her name into a school book. In Delhi, a man whispers a memory of her visit into his grandson's ear. In Cape Town, a widow lights a candle on her porch. In a small village in Wales, bells ring out not in mourning, but in gratitude. And somewhere, someone recites her favorite psalm aloud, not for ceremony, for closeness. A bell rings again, softer this time. Edward will carry the crown, but he cannot carry what she carried alone. No one can. For what Victoria carried was not just empire. She bore the weight of time, of change, of all that came before her, and all she would never see. She did not understand it all. She could not. But she tried. And in the trying, she made the shape of a world. Ash drifts in the quiet. In the map room, dust still settles gently. In the chapel, the air no longer stirs. But in the dreams of those who came after, her name flickers once like a candle behind glass. Not bright, not blazing, but steady. And there it remains. That night, the halls of Windsor sleep beneath a sky rinsed clean by time. You return slowly to the chamber where everything began, not in fanfare, but in reflection. The mirror still stands beside the velvet chair, its glass untouched since the Queen last faced it. You step closer. The frame is gilded, yes, but dulled by age. The surface does not shimmer. It waits. You look. And she is there. Not as she was in youth, nor in mourning, nor in state, but in everything she left behind. You almost forget this isn't a memory. The room is quiet. No voices, no guards, just the echo of breath and the soft sigh of old curtains in the midnight breeze. On the desk rests the final diary, closed. Beside it, a folded letter. On the floor, a map left half-rolled, its red lines faded to ghost. You reach toward the mirror, but it shows more than you. It shows her torch, set down gently upon a stone. Its flame does not flicker. It glows with the steady hush of enduring care. It lights a lion's pelt draped in shadow, a bell's outline resting on a cushion of velvet, and a map, once crisp, now softened by age, but still present. All the symbols return. The bell, the torch, the map, the veil. Each reappears in the glass, not as ornament, but as memory's shape. Echoes folded into a legacy too vast for one room. They are not explained. They are simply felt. The silence is heavier now. The mirror does not speak, but it listens. And in that long, slow gaze, you hear it. Not her voice, but her presence. The steadiness of a rain that carried nations. The quiet weight of sorrow borne without pause. The fierce gentleness of a woman who did not always understand the world, but refused to turn away from it. She is gone. But the mirror reflects onward, through Edward, through the sons of her sons, through wars yet to come, through dreams yet to be dreamt. You reach to touch the glass. It is cool, but not cold. A candle flickers. Your breath slows. And outside the palace walls, the night stretches across the empire she once guided. It does not end. It shifts. It breathes. It waits for dawn. And inside this chamber, still and sacred, the mirror remains. No longer for her, but for those who follow. And now, the story lies quiet. The empire, once humming with telegraphs and horse hooves, sleeps beneath constellations unchanged. The bells have stopped. The black crepe has been folded. The portraits remain where they were hung, but feel gentler now, softened by time's breath. And you, traveler through this long twilight dream, stand on the far shore of history's great sea. You do not need to speak. You only need to feel. The footsteps of queens no longer echo, but their weight has pressed softly into the earth. Close your eyes, and the torch flickers again, not blazing with conquest, but glowing with remembrance. You see the veil, not drawn in mourning, but lifted in understanding. The lion's pelt rests, not for battle, but for rest. The map, rolled up, waits for another's hand. And somewhere far away, the bell chimes one final time, soft enough not to startle, just enough to say, "You were here. She was here." The past does not vanish. It becomes part of the hush. The hush becomes part of you. And now, there is only stillness, a gentle breath, a folding inward of time. Let it settle. Let it carry you. Let it drift through your thoughts like fog across the moor, quiet, persistent, and kind. The stories have all been told. The candles are low. The night has lengthened. And you are safe here, in this echo, wrapped in velvet silence, cradled by memory, and gently, ever so gently, invited to return, share the stillness, or simply sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.